of the annual spring town meeting to order. It is May 27th. I am the moderator, Kate Poverman, and I welcome you all. A couple of things. In 1 minute, I will go through some housekeeping details, and then I'll give you a general idea of what the order for business is tonight. Before I say that, I want to say that the communications on the town meeting listserv have reached a low that I cannot believe it reached. And I want to let you know, if anyone impugns anybody else's character, they are ejected from the meeting immediately. Okay, I hope that's clear. There have been some corrected votes that I will read the totals. Article 9, the total was 222 yes, 0 no, 3 abstain. Articles 14, 16, and 17. Yes was 17, no was 211, abstain was 8. The main motion on Article 17 was 220 yes, 9 no, 9 abstain. Article 16, 220 yes, 6 no, 8 abstain. Article 12, main motion, 220 yes, 5 no, 5 abstain. Article 18, main motion, 152 yes, 77 no, 10 abstain. Okay, for some more housekeeping, all of our votes. What is the point of order that he could possibly? What is the point of order? Mr. Offner?
Okay. The point of order has to do with application of ejecting people from a meeting for impugning someone else's character. That could be interpreted very broadly, and it's possible that an interpretation and application of that could violate the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, which
Mr. Offner, this is specifically allowed by the town meeting handbook and town meeting time. If somebody is disruptive or unruly or insulting, they are allowed to be removed.
Right.
Fortunately, in this time, we will not have to use a constable to remove them. So your point of order is rejected. We're moving on. All right. So as I was saying, all votes for calling the question will be recorded, just so we have a record of exactly what's being done. Related to the chat room, we're going to try to increase efficiency by asking you, when you contact the chat monitor, say whether you have a question or a comment. If you have a comment, please say what side you are speaking for. And as always, we will try to alternate between pro and con. Okay, now the first article of business is going to be to move to reconsider Articles 19 and 20. Actually, I'm just going to continue. So I do not, okay, do I have a, I'm not sure if I have a second. I'd like to have a second of the motion to move consideration of Articles 19 and 20 regarding marijuana regulation from next Tuesday, June 1st to next Tuesday, June 3rd. May I have a second? Okay, it's seconded. We will start the vote now. Your vote. Am I unmuted? All right, Ms. McNally, hello, and what is your vote? Okay, for a change, it's me saying, can you hear me? All right. Mr. Salmon, can you wave if you can hear me? I see you on the screen. All right, fantastic. Now, we're waiting for Ms. McNally. Please unmute Ms. McNally. Ready, Ms. McNally, what?
185 yes.
I don't have Ms. McNally's vote. Okay, we'll wait 10 more seconds for you, Ms. McNally. All right, I'm sure we will get those technical issues worked out. But right now, can you give me?
185 yes, 6 no, 10 abstentions.
Okay, the total is 185 yes, 6 no, and 10 abstention. The motion passes, and we will move consideration of Articles 19 and 20 from June 1st to next Thursday, June 3rd. Okay. The first substantive articles we will be discussing are Articles 37 and 11. But first, we are going to vote on the motion to reconsider the vote that was taken on Article 13 at our last meeting. The motion to reconsider was moved by Mr. O'Neill and seconded by Mr. Lynn Jones. As I indicated in the emails I sent out today, the basis of the request was to reconsider the vote because of the confusion over issues like how the property under examination could be used, whether it was a zoning issue involved, whether it was a general bylaw, and what effect the LHD would have. I sent the statement out to everyone, so I will not read it here. So that is the basis of my motion, granting the motion to reconsider. Once we, Mr. Ananian, what can I do for you?
Sorry. Yeah, I just have a procedural question. Does the second on that motion also have to be from someone who voted no on the previous article?
No. Just to clarify, it's the statement that was, well, anyway, no. All right. The actual consideration of Article 18 will be after consideration of Articles 7 and 11, 37 and 11. Is everything, I've got some chatter here. What is the name? Julia Borfine? Shauna Borfine? Okay, Ms. Borfine, how can I help you?
Shauna Giora Gorfine, Town Meeting Member Precinct 11. Madam Moderator, respectfully, I would ask that you read the motion to reconsider before us. It was only sent on the Town Meeting Member list, and I'm not sure that that counts as having it distributed to everyone.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Okay, here is the statement. An actual motion was not required to be submitted, just a statement by somebody who had a valid basis for asking for the motion to be considered. It was sent at 11:46 by Danelle O'Neill. Good morning, Madam Moderator. I voted no on Article 18 and am requesting reconsideration. I understand that there was confusion over what development would be allowed at the site and whether or not this was a zoning change or a bylaw change. I also feel the debate was cut off too quickly. There were many people left in the queue to speak that town meeting should have had the opportunity to hear from. Thank you in advance. You may call me if you have any questions. This was followed up by a second email saying, sorry, but I just wanted to clarify that along with the others, I was confused as well. Okay, we are now going to vote on the motion to reconsider Article 18. As I said, the discussion of the article itself will be later in the evening. So now we are voting on the motion to reconsider. And I need a majority vote. And we will start the voting now. Oh, geez. Okay, the time is over. Do we have Ms. McNally on the line? Okay, Ms. McNally.
86 no, 8 abstentions.
Okay, the total is 137 yes, 86 no, 8 abstentions. The motion passes. We will consider the substance of the motion later on tonight. Okay, we are now going to move to the consideration of Article 37, which you will find on page 37 to 6 to 37-7 of your original materials. I have been reminded that people need to state their names and precincts. This is especially important where I have totally mangled your name, which happened earlier. Okay. This is a motion that I will allow the petitioner, Maya Norton, to introduce. It is moved by Mr. Green and seconded by Mr. Sandman. Ms. Norton, may we hear from you, please?
Yes, but I believe that some members of my team are still in the waiting room. That should be Sarah Mattner, Maslin, Sasha Calvert, Brian Lee, Alice McGarvey, Thompson, and Tal Kennetti.
We only have one person.
Okay.
You're not muted.
Madam Moderator, may I start my time?
Yes, you may. You have 3.5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Maya Norton, and I'm here to ask you to vote yes on Article 37 to declare a climate emergency in Brookline. It has been my privilege to work with students from Brookline High School's Environmental Action Club in Sunrise, Brookline, and a 6th grade Girl Scout troop in sharing our work with you tonight. Tonight, when we pass Climate Emergency Brookline, we will join 28 towns and cities in Massachusetts and 2,000 communities worldwide in declaring climate emergency. This declaration is not a symbolic act. It represents a deep commitment for changing the way we live, starting with this first step. Article 37 has 4 priorities: demanding emergency response at emergency speed, creating and adopting an aggressive and strategic climate crisis action plan that sets a trajectory for carbon neutrality in the earliest economically and technically feasible timeframe, and setting a new goal for net zero emissions at 2040, reducing our current target by a decade. Investing in public education with a recommended annual Climate Action Summit bolstered by strategic working teams. Prioritizing vulnerable communities as central to the planning and outcome of climate mobilization. Brookline is rich in human resources. In our community alone, we have an abundance of climate action groups, but we are not talking to each other or setting strategic priorities. Today, I speak to you, Brookline Green Space Alliance, Climate Action Brookline, Climate is Everyone's Business, Elders Climate Action, Extinction Rebellion, 350 Mass, Mothers Out Front, Select Board Climate Action Committee, and the Town Meeting's Green Caucus, and ask you to join forces in this emergency as if the lives of your children and grandchildren depend on it. The climate emergency needs all of us. In 2019, the town of Brookline hired its first full-time employee devoted to community resilience. During that time, the Climate Action Summit was held with hundreds of community members participating. That fall, 11 warrant articles pertaining to climate action were introduced to town meeting, the highest concentration ever. But when Brookline lost that one employee, the position was allowed to lie fallow for a year and a half, from fall 2019 to spring 2021.
We can't hear you anymore, but you have 1 minute. She's been cut off.
I was muted by the
Okay,
host.
unintentionally. So your next minute.
It's more than a minute. I know the exact timing, but could you tell me the last thing that you heard, please?
Excuse me, we're sort of fumbling here. Why don't you go back a paragraph?
Okay, I promise you that I know the exact timing. It's exactly 3 minutes and 25 seconds. So if you could just let me resume the rest of it, it would be perfect timing.
I will take your word on this. Go for it.
Thank you. A climate emergency needs all of us. In 2019, the town of Brookline hired its first full-time employee devoted to community resilience. During that time, the first Climate Action Summit was held with hundreds of community members participating. That fall, 11 warrant articles pertaining to climate action were introduced to town meeting, the highest concentration ever. But when Brookline lost that one employee, the position was allowed to lie fallow for a year and a half, from spring 2019 to spring 2021, with no staff devoted full-time to climate resilience. As a result, strategic action suffered. This cannot be allowed to happen again. Climate emergency must be our top priority, a partnership of the town of Brookline, our climate groups, and all of our residents. Brookline sits in a position of privilege, but our lives are interconnected with each other. The world scientist's warning to humanity is stark, stating, quote, "We are jeopardizing our future by not reining in our intense but geographically and demographically uneven material consumption, which threatens the face of humanity," end quote. Declaring a climate emergency is an act of justice, committing us to drastically reducing our overconsumption toward a more interdependent, regenerative way of life. Today, I ask you, Brookline Town Meeting, to listen with open hearts and open minds to the passionate words of our young people. We as adults have done too little for too long, and now their futures are at stake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bernard Green is next. I believe speaking on behalf of the select board, but if you could clarify that, that would be fantastic.
That is correct, Madam Moderator. Bernard Green, speaking on behalf of the Select Board. Article 37 is a petitioned resolution that seeks to have the town declare a climate emergency and take emergency actions to address climate change. The resolution was first taken up by the Sustainability Subcommittee of the Advisory Committee, which held 3 public hearings and raised various concerns regarding duplication of effort, administrative expense, and other concerns. And I'm sure the Advisory Committee will provide any further additional information on their deliberations at their point in this discussion. The petitioners returned with the version of the resolution in your combined reports at page 37-6. Among other things, it recognizes the over 20 years of work by the town on climate change and changes the target date for net zero carbon emissions from 2030 in the original article to 2040, which is still an acceleration of our current target date of 2050. The board agrees with the overall intent of the resolution and appreciates the edits made by the petitioners, which acknowledge the town's ongoing efforts concerning climate change and the structure within which those efforts are undertaken. The select board voted 4-0 with 1 member absent for favorable action on the edited motion offered by the petitioner on April 27, 2021. April 27 was a vote of the select board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have the pleasure of hearing from some Brookline High students whom I thank for their patience and diligence in waiting to speak at town meeting. And also we very much appreciate their efforts. First is Sasha Calvert, who is the co-petitioner, Ms. Calvert, you have 2 minutes once you are unmuted and started.
Hi, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Sasha Calvert. I am 16 years old, and I am a co-petitioner for Warrant Article 37. I've grown up in a world full of distrust, bigotry, selfishness, and greed. I've watched time and time again as those in power have failed me, have failed you, and have failed all of us to act. We simply do not have time to waste anymore. Our lives and our futures depend on us all taking tangible action to combat the effects of climate change. And it is essential that Brookline be a leader in what is already a too slow climate mitigation process. We as a town are far behind where we need to be in order to mitigate local effects of the crisis. And therefore, implementing Warrant Article 37 is a crucial step of the long process we have ahead of us. Let me repeat myself. We have absolutely no time to waste. By supporting Warrant Article 37, you are supporting my future and the future of every single person whose face you see on this screen. Failure to pass this article sends a clear message. You do not care about me, your children, your neighbors, and your fellow humans. Furthermore, this warrant article seeks to support communities hit hardest by the climate crisis. Already, we have seen the climate crisis take a disproportionate toll on the Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people in America. We need
30 seconds.
We need legislation that names the discrepancies and effects so that we may adequately prepare and mobilize to support communities most impacted. I urge favorable action on this warrant article, because if not now, when?
Thank you very much, Ms. Calvert. Okay, our next speaker is Brian Lee. Mr. Lee, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Brian Lee, Precinct 5, and I'm a student at Brookline High School. So in a couple of recent years, the climate crisis has taken the world by storm quite literally. Consequences from fossil fuel burning and excess emissions have come back to haunt us, most notably shown for the forest fire in Australia last year, the Amazon the year before, and most recently, the historic snowstorm in Texas. And although I'm not directly targeted by these effects of climate change, I've been distraught and angry by the devastating effects it has brought towards unprotected, marginalized communities and animal ecosystems that are foreshadowing the 6th mass extinction on our planet. Brookline is fortunately less affected by the climate crisis, being one of the wealthier, but also geographically advantaged towns in Massachusetts and the country. Stopping climate change is an integral effort in cooperation between everyone, not just those who suffer from it, and we must step up to this effort.
You have 1 minute.
Article 37 asks to declare a climate emergency and set forward a climate crisis action plan that will hold Brookline accountable for reaching its goals of sustainability. It will create a concrete roadmap for the town through the means of education, legislation, and opening conversation for everyone. However, declaring a climate emergency isn't just about our local community. It is joining 28 Massachusetts towns, including Boston and Cambridge, who had already done this in an effort to put more pressure on the lawmaking and governing body on the State House and to push for a state climate emergency as well. That is why I urge you all to vote in favor for our warrant Article 37 tonight and increase our town participation in climate action in coming years, because they are extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. We will now hear from student Alice McGarvey Thompson.
Good evening. My name is Alice McGarvey Thompson. I'm a 10th grader at Brookline High School, and I'm here today speaking in support of Warrant Article 37. Since September 2019, I've been involved in climate activism with an array of different local groups. This is because we have until 2030 to cut our emissions drastically. I'll restate. We have until I am 25 to change everything about the way we live. I can't wait to take action on this issue, because by the time I finish college, it will be too late. If there's one thing I've noticed, it's that even within Brookline groups, the majority of climate activism happens outside of Brookline. The climate action in Brookline's government feels like a distant and minimal force, hardly even there for us. I've heard multiple of my peers voice their frustration of not being able to have any influence on the Brookline climate policy as young people. For this reason, it's confusing to me when town meeting members complain about lack of community engagement. I know I come at this with immense racial and economic privilege as a white person in Brookline. The frustration that I feel about not being included in the process is nothing compared to the systematic destruction of Indigenous land, the pollution and poisoning of Black and Brown neighborhoods, and every way in which environmental racism is detrimental to communities of color. Zooming in on our immediate surroundings, you can already see the impacts of environmental racism around us. In the Boston and Brookline area, neighborhoods and districts with more people of color tend to have higher asthma rates as well as lower tree coverage and higher temperatures. Here in Brookline, the data already shows us that sometimes 8-degree difference between the most and least densely populated areas of town. The people most affected by the climate crisis must be central to Brookline's fight for a livable future. I'm sure you've heard this before, but what creates a problem cannot solve it. A climate response run by the white and few will not solve a system that protects the white and few. Brookline can be at the forefront of battling climate change, but to do so, we must include and amplify the voices of all community members. I hope you will consider this and vote favorable action on Warrant Article 37. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is kennetti. I apologize if I've kennetti, Caneti. Please unmute yourself. You are. Oh, Ms. Kennetti, you can go ahead. You have 2 minutes. You've been unmuted. Ms. Kennetti? Okay. All right, we will come back to you. So I'm now going to call on Sarah Mattner Maslin, who has 1.5 minutes.
Hi, thank you. My name is Sarah Mattner Maslin. I'm a resident of Precinct 11, freshman at Brookline High School, and Sunrise Brookline's Hub Co-Coordinator. One of my favorite things about Brookline's town government is how exceedingly local it is. My neighbors represent me in our government, and I think that's pretty darn cool. Brookline's structure allows for big change on a local level, and as an organizer, utilizing that power is really significant to me. You all right now have a chance to push Brookline further on the path towards sustainability and climate justice. You've heard some excellent reasons why Warrant Article 37 deserves your yes vote tonight, but let me reiterate a few. You, your children, your grandchildren, your cousins and nieces and nephews, and everyone you've ever met and everyone you haven't will be impacted by this climate crisis. Working class Black and Brown folks will face the brunt of this crisis first, but it's coming for us too. The ocean is 5 miles from here. The sea level rise will be here soon enough. We, as a people, have a duty to each other to care for and protect each other's lives and livelihoods. Warrant Article 37 puts Brookline on the trajectory to do what we can to protect all of our futures, those in this Zoom, this town, the state, this country, and this world as a whole. Please vote favorable action on Warrant Article 37. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennetti, have you successfully solved your issues? What's that? Oh. All right. You have 2 minutes. Can't hear you. Okay, apparently you are signed in twice. What I recommend.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I had to go to my phone because my computer isn't working. Okay, so hi, my name is Kennetti, and I'm a 10th grader at Brookline High School. I'm speaking in support of Warrant Article 37 because the climate crisis is one of the most pressing issues of our time, and Brookline must work as hard as we can towards climate justice. I'll start off with my own story in climate activism. It started in 8th grade when I was 14, and I had just seen that a global climate strike was being planned in exactly a week. My anxiety surrounding the crisis was growing bigger and bigger, so my friends and I organized a walkout within our middle school, Ridley. The looming threat of the climate emergency was something that I had a really hard time dealing with as an 8th grader, and I saw countless children, even younger than me at the time, who were just as worried as I was. I don't know about you, but I think that the biggest things a middle schooler should be worried about should be small, like whether they can find 2 socks of the same kind or whether their crush likes them back. not something like an irreversible crisis that we barely have any time left to ward off because the adults were not doing their jobs and caring about the future of their children and grandchildren. However, this was still a really good point. As I, a white upper middle class girl, worry about my own future, this crisis is the present and past of many Black and Brown communities, low-income communities, Indigenous communities, and more. As Alice said, the US, including the greater Boston area, perpetuates environmental racism on the daily. These communities are often sectioned off as sacrifice zones, where most companies put their fossil fuel plants, pipelines, and other harmful infrastructure. Low-income communities of color are bearing the brunt of the effects of the climate crisis, and Brookline has a chance to stop perpetuating this. Our emissions don't just bubble up within Brookline's borders, of course. They go to our whole world's atmosphere and therefore bolster the effect of the climate crisis for everyone, especially communities that are already marginalized. If Brookline is to center racial justice and economic justice and care for the people of our community, then we must act now. We must boldly pursue climate legislation, and warrant Article 37 is a great start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I applaud the eloquence of all of our high school students, and I understand you now have to study for finals or some other very unpleasant task. So, I'm going to call Claire Stamfer now. Stamfer, S-T-A-M. Oh. Ms. Stamfer has been replaced by Alok Samani. Samani, S-O-M-A-N-I, A-L-O-K is the first name. Good morning. You have 2 minutes. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Alok Samani, at-large member, Advisory Committee, Precinct 5. I'm providing the Advisory Committee report on Warrant Article 37. It's a resolution requesting Brookline to declare a climate emergency, to take actions to address it, not including but not limited to aspiring to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2040, ensuring that our solutions promote social equity, protect vulnerable populations, and are developed in an inclusive manner, and investing in public education through regular community forums. We continue to experience the effects of climate change through the extremes of weather, the increase in ocean temperatures, the accelerated melting of glaciers, and the droughts that it brings. Indeed, the town has recognized the importance of this topic as far back as the early 1960s, and it has taken consistent and concrete steps to address climate change. Some recent highlights include, in the year 2000, passing a resolution to replace all the traffic lights with LED lights. And in 2002, creating the first climate action plan. And then again in 2008, directing the select board to create a climate action committee. In 2011, the town completed the requirements to be designated a green community. And in 2018, the town joined the Paris Climate Agreement as a non-state participant. And again in 2018, completed the third revision to the Climate Action Plan. 2019, the town hired a full-time sustainability program administrator. And in August 2020, just last year, the Collins Center report recommended elevating this position to that of a full division head with responsibility for updating the strategic plan and for developing concrete goals and an implementation timeline. The Sustainability Subcommittee of the Advisory Committee held 3 public hearings on Article 37.
You have 1 minute.
Members of the subcommittee and the public were supportive of taking action. During the hearings, concerns were also expressed that the resolution might duplicate efforts already underway in Brookline and caution that the proposed actions might distract from that effort. The full advisory committee met twice to consider warrant Article 37 and did so after the recommendations of the Select Board Climate Action Committee were available and could be reviewed with the petitioner. By a vote of 24 in favor, none against, and 3 abstentions, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on Article 37 as amended and moved by the petitioner. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. We now have the pleasure of hearing from, by video, Girl Scout Troop 82545. You will see as soon as our tech people line it up. It'll be just a minute. Shall I go to the next speaker?
Yeah.
Okay. I need to make sure that Mr. Ricardo is ready. Sorry for the technical difficulties. All right.
Because your audio is not on. You're not sharing audio, are you?
The next speaker?
Yes.
Okay. We are going to come back to the Girl Scout troop in 3 minutes. I now call on Christy Electrist to speak. Ms. Christy Electrist, and Ms. Electrist, you have 3 minutes after you begin.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm Christy Electrist, town meeting member of Precinct 7. I run a nonprofit focused on this critical nexus of ecological resilience, social equity, and finance, and I'm a local climate activist, lucky enough to work with a wide spectrum of the dedicated climate activists in this town. I serve on the board of Climate Action Brookline. I'm a member of Mothers Up Front, part of Climate is Everybody's Business, an effort to get businesses to take action, a member of the Green Caucus, co-chair of Brookline's Safe Routes to School Task Force, and have been working across Brookline to connect many of the amazing initiatives that have been bubbling up from the students, staff, and parents across the district through green teams, garden and climate education, student activism, and more recently, even a green zine or electronic magazine that will launch later this year. I am so happy the petitioners brought forward this article because it acknowledges the immense urgency of acting on climate on a local level, something this body has repeatedly done over the 3 years that I've been in town meeting, but sometimes in siloed ways. We voted on and passed articles to ensure new school buildings would be fossil fuel free. We've led the way in banning plastic bags and straws. We've passed warrant article 21 in fall 2019 to prevent new fossil fuel infrastructure from being installed. And this town meeting, warrant articles 25 and 26 will take up some alternative approaches to do the same things that I hope you'll all support. And in warrant article 31 from 2019, a fall town meeting, we voted to prioritize climate smart, holistic transportation policy that could provide guidance to staff on how to move us to prioritize people over vehicles and set concrete targets for our sustainable transportation goals. Our dedicated town staff now needs strong leadership from the town's executive body, and that's what this climate emergency declaration does. An emergency means we all have to work together, the select board, town administrator, staff, across departments, volunteer activists, community members, including students, to take urgent action and reduce our climate impacts and address the inequities that climate change has created in our community.
You have 1 minute.
Climate justice means building local resilience to climate impacts and addressing the role of our community in the range of harms that intersect with the climate crisis, both locally and globally. This morning, I hosted a panel on investing in climate justice, and one of my panelists, Reverend Mariama White-Hammond, founder of New Roots AME Church in Dorchester, repeated something her father and grandmother often said: to whom much is given, much is required. We in Brookline can't wait for others to act. We need to act with urgency and commit to coming together as a community and take action to reduce our climate impact, distribute the benefits and costs equitably, and provide justice in the communities that have been hurt the most from this climate crisis, excuse me. As a community who has strong understanding of the science of climate change and the consequences of climate inaction, I urge us all to vote favorable action on this warrant article. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What's the status of our Girl Scouts?
Hello, we are Izzy, Julia, Anastasia, Erica, and Megan, Brookline Girl Scout Troop 8255. This year we chose to do the Breathe journey that has to do with the air we breathe and appreciating clean air. We are in support of Article 37 that declares a climate emergency in Brookline.
Hello, my name's Megan Chisholm and I'm in 6th grade and I go to the British International School of Boston. Near my house is this wonderful wooded area where me and my dog like to go when I'm having a rough day and I just need to clear my head. The place is really magical to me and it always brings me peace. But unfortunately, a couple days ago, this man was smoking a cigar while he was walking the path on the phone. And he just dropped the cigar as if it was nothing to the environment and it meant nothing. And he just lighted another one and kept going. I really hope that in the future, children will still be able to experience nature the way I do and that it doesn't get destroyed by pollution.
Hello, I'm Izzy from the Florida Ruffin Ridley School. I have asthma and more people are getting asthma because of the pollution. I hope the air I breathe in the future is clean and healthy to inhale. Worldwide asthma rates are steadily increasing, especially for children under 5 years old. They're the hardest hit. When I use the inhaler, I feel limited. I can't run long distances without having to use the inhaler. Every time I'm about to do a physical activity, the first thing I think about is forgetting my inhaler and having trouble breathing. And that is why clean air is extra important to me.
Hello, my name is Erica. My family tries to use reusable plastic bottles because when you use unreusable plastic bottles, then you normally throw it away afterward, and it pollutes the ocean and can cause animals to suffer. So you could help to buy reusable plastic bottles because if you buy reusable plastic bottles, you can help save the world one plastic bottle at a time.
My name is Julia, and I am a 6th grader at FRR. My friend's house was destroyed by a wildfire. There has been an increase in wildfires due to climate change. Changes in the climate have led to drier and hotter temperatures. This increases the chances that a wildfire will happen because of droughts. Trees are important to help keep the air clean.
My name is Anastasia, and I go to Runkle School. Every day, there are over 50,000 cars passing through Brookline on Route 9. That's just Route 9. All of those cars impact our air quality. My family uses bikes and scooters whenever we can. We run errands, we go to work, and we try to take car-free vacations. Every little bit we do now helps make the air better for the future. I don't want Massachusetts to be like California with air quality alerts. Please help us make a cleaner, healthier future for everyone by passing warrant Article 37.
Thank you very much. Again, I am very impressed by the eloquence of our students, and I'd like to thank Mrs. Susan Park for helping facilitate this. It's Cunningham speaking. Ms. Cunningham, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'll keep my remarks really short. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Cunningham. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 15. First of all, I would like to thank Maya and Sasha and all the other inspiring students for putting together this warrant article, for working through the very difficult committee process, for making this warrant article such a strong and important warrant article. It's really inspiring to hear the students speak tonight. I also started my involvement with climate activism as a student, so it really brings me back to those years, and I really appreciate their hard work and dedication. So I've also grown up in Brookline, so I've witnessed firsthand how the climate has changed since I was a little girl, since when I had my kids, and now into my children's adulthood and having grandchildren. It's alarming. It's alarming to have 3 90-degree days when we're still in May. And I appreciate this resolution for us to vote on. I wanted to speak specifically to the climate goals that Maya has incorporated into this resolution of getting to net zero by 2040. This is of critical importance. The United Nations International Panel on Climate Change has recently released data showing that with trying to get to net zero by 2040, we only have a 67% chance of staying within 1.5 degrees centigrade. And that is giving us the chance to avoid the most catastrophic of climate consequences. So this isn't a very good outcome that we're shooting for. This is a minimal outcome that we're shooting for, but without having goals, we can't achieve those goals. So it's very important that we put these goals in place and that we achieve them. And lastly, again, I'd just like to thank everybody at town meeting and the town of Brookline for acting on these issues, for acting boldly, for being leaders. And again, thanks to Maya and all her other supporters in taking this warrant article forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cunningham. We will now hear from what is currently our last speaker, Ms. Harris. If anyone else wants to speak, now is the time to contact the chat monitor. Ms. Harris? Oh, was that Mr. Harris? I apologize. Oh, okay. John Harris, are you lined up to speak or? I'll unmute and let's see if I got the Harris wrong. That's certainly possible.
Very good. Can you hear me?
Yes, I apologize
hello.
for getting the wrong
Thank
Harris.
you very
Yes,
much. Let me get my text back here. Okay, thank you. My name is John Harris of Precinct 8, and I am also co-chair of Climate Action Brookline, although speaking privately. I urge a favorable vote on warrant Article 37. It moves forward our decades-long effort to address the climate crisis. Right now, I'd like to focus on one major recommendation of the article, which is the sustainability working teams. The petitioner has vividly described the importance of our having a current climate action plan, but who will compile and update these plans, which are major commitments of time and effort. Obviously, overall coordination and leadership should be by our new sustainability director, Tom Barrasso, and it is fantastic that he is on board. But Tom will have the cheerful support and assistance of hundreds of Brookliners. As the Collins Center, which last year evaluated the town's climate efforts, put it, quote, Brookline has an abundance of skilled, knowledgeable, and committed residents willing to put meaningful time and effort into furthering our sustainability agenda. At the Sustainability Summit in June 2019, over 90 people, including many town meeting members and including around 25 town staff, signed up to join 9 sustainability working teams. And I believe many more people would sign up for such teams today. I won't list them all here, but they fit into broad categories. Renewable electricity generation from town or school-owned buildings or through the Brookline Green Electricity or BGE contract negotiated by the town. Energy consumption, mostly in transportation or building operations. Green space, agriculture, composting and waste, and communications and education. Some teams have been continually working on projects and the others could be revived at any time. The Collins Center concluded working teams should be supported and fully utilized to engage staff, department heads, senior management, resident volunteers, and experts. The relevant town staff and especially the sustainability director should prioritize the areas promising the biggest bang for the buck, in particular, transportation, which is the source of 42% of greenhouse gases in Mass, and building operations at 29%. I'm going to skip a little for in the interest of time. I have more development of the working teams, but that can come later. A major reason to support and join working teams. They're an excellent way to improve communication, so we all know what everybody else is doing. They would help avoid the long and time-consuming process of reinventing the wheel. They would provide forums to reconcile differing ideas of how to address the issues. They would ensure that our efforts complement each other, and at best, they would support and synergize each other. To conclude, tomorrow, I invite you all to join a sustainability working team and/or to join Climate Action Brookline, Mothers Out Front Brookline, or any of the other local climate groups inspired by Brookline's new declaration of climate emergency. But tonight, this evening, I urge favorable action on warrant Article 37. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. And I misspoke. We have 2 other people who have signed up to speak. First is Ms. Cornelia Kea Vanderzeel.
Thank you.
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I am Kea Vanderzeel, town meeting member from Precinct 15, although I appear as Cornelia Vanderzeel on your screen. I'm speaking in favor of warrant Article 37. The nature of the climate emergency that the world faces has been well laid out by the petitioners and should be obvious to all of us. This is not a new issue, but it has not been addressed with the urgency that it requires, leaving us now facing an impending catastrophe. As a physician and a board member of Greater Boston Physicians for Social Responsibility, I would like to speak a bit about the public health dimensions of this crisis. For decades, PSR has done work on the detrimental health effects caused by our reliance on fossil fuels. The health effects of an ever-warming climate, rising sea levels, times of torrential rains, droughts, worsening air and water pollution, to name a few, are now obvious to most of us. These changes impact not only the health and public health directly, but indirectly as it affects food and water supplies. These are also environmental justice issues, as extreme weather exacerbates the social determinants of health through the loss of homes, infrastructure, and jobs, all felt disproportionately by low income and minority populations. The leading killer of extreme weather is heat waves, as we saw with the European heat wave of 2003, which killed 70,000 people. Heat waves can cause heat stroke, leading to convulsions, coma, and even death, as we saw in Europe. Urban areas with their urban heat islands are particularly vulnerable. These areas are often populated by the poor and those with an excess of pre-existing conditions. Increasing ground levels of ozone cause damage to the lungs and asthma and have a detrimental effect on the cardiovascular system. In addition, it causes the birth of very low birth weight infants who can suffer a lifetime of ill health. Very low birth weight is the leading cause of infant mortality in the US. Extreme rainfall leads to flooding and the contamination of our water supply, and increase the incidence of waterborne illnesses such as hepatitis and giardia, among many others. Ever rising temperatures encourage mosquitoes, which can transmit a variety of diseases such as dengue, malaria, West Nile virus, and Zika. So the rising sea levels lead to the inundation of coastal lands with seawater, making them no longer amenable to agricultural use and drives the inhabitants to flee, which often leads to the intensification of conflict and war. And these are just the more easily quantifiable effects of climate change. Due to lack of time, I have not touched on mental health issues exacerbated by climate change, nor have I spoken about the detrimental effects of the extractive technology underpinning the use of fossil fuels. I urge you to visit PSR's website and read the monograph, Heat, Fire, Water, How Climate Change Has Created a Public Health Emergency, and join me in voting favorable action on warrant Article 37. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, we have one more speaker and we are going to hear Ms. Bastion. Then we can vote on the issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Bonnie Bastion, Precinct 5. I want to thank Maya and Sasha for doing this work. They really went through the gauntlet to bring us to this day. In the original text, in the combined reports for warrant Article 37, there is a reference to the phrase a just transition. A just transition is a framework that provides for a transformation that is based on equity, social justice, planning, and providing for the most vulnerable members of society with the same care as those with greater resources. Its principles move communities from an extractive to a regenerative economy, from fossil fuel dependence to net zero living, with a reliance on cooperation and deep social interdependence. As an organizer for Mutual Aid Brookline and a believer in taking responsibility for caring for each other and all that entails, this concept resonates with me. Climate change deeply exacerbates racial and economic inequities, war and famine, and a million things that we haven't even conceived of yet. It's an issue that has a looming impact that grows exponentially the longer we wait and the slower we move to implement an emergency response. Mutual aid is a tool that many in our Brookline community built this past year, initially as a device to come to the aid of ourselves as a community in this pandemic crisis, but really mutual aid is a way of life. It's a more equitable way of being in the world that functions beyond our systems and institutions that more often than not play a role in furthering intersectional inequity and harm. When more destructive and life-altering climate change consequences are speeding at us like a train barreling down the tracks, mutual aid will be a necessary system of coming to each other's rescue, young, old, Black, white, poor, and wealthy. Our humanity and ability to survive on Earth is linked to each other. Doing all we can to mitigate catastrophic loss is taking responsibility for each other as we live in community on this planet together. I realize that in Brookline, we are mostly on the same page regarding the importance of addressing climate change. Where I have seen us differ is in the level of urgency, coordination, cooperation, and sacrifice we are willing to make as a community for the greater good. Look at all that we accomplished during this COVID crisis as we gathered our enormous intellectual resources together to construct solutions at emergency speed to solve the huge challenges around school, government, and health in a global pandemic. We have proven that we are capable of enormous things very quickly. Let's begin the preparation and action towards this oncoming global crisis with the same urgency because it threatens our very existence. Please join me in voting favorable action on warrant Article 37 to implement an emergency response at emergency speed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I will entertain a motion for a vote. It's been moved and seconded. All right. Oh, everyone mute yourselves. They should mute. Okay. All right. We are going to start our 30-second vote. Oh, not yet. Oh, okay. Yes. What is that point of order, Mr. Burstein? Mr. Burstein?
Yes, Michael Burstein, town meeting member, precinct 12. Do we need a motion to vote if there's no other speakers? Can't we just go right to the main motion?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's what I meant.
Thank you, Madam
Sorry.
Moderator.
You're
That's what I
absolutely
thought.
right. And it is a point of order. Congratulations. We will now vote on Article 37 to adopt a climate emergency resolution. Now the vote begins. Thank you. Oops. Okay, we have a vote of 228 yes, 1 no, 4 abstentions. The motion to adopt the resolution passes handily, to say the least. Okay, we will now move on to consider Article number 11. Article 11 relates to a motion to add a statement at town meeting acknowledging the history of the indigenous people in Brookline. It is brought by Mr. Fernandez and seconded by Ms. Ashkenazi. Let's go to Fernandez's.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. This is Raul Fernandez for a unanimous select board. In a bit, I believe you'll hear from the petitioners who will sort of lay out exactly what it is that we're doing here. But let me say on behalf of the select board, this petition has been submitted by the Indigenous People Celebration Committee, which asked the town to amend the general bylaws to allow for a land acknowledgement statement to be read after the singing of the national anthem at town meeting. Select board agreed that this recognition is an important reminder of our history and that we need to confront to move forward as a more inclusive community. As the select board's liaison to the committee, it was my pleasure to work with my colleagues and the North American Indian Center of Boston on this land acknowledgement. I'm proud of how firm and clear this statement is, using uncompromising and truthful language: unceded land, theft, atrocities, enslavement, colonialism, systemic racism. Like a powerful smelling salt, it awakens our senses at a time when we legislators need it most. But it also invites us in its closing to be part of the solution, saying, quote, as we remember these atrocities, town meeting members and the larger town must commit ourselves to address the ongoing inequities that are the result of our history of colonialism and racism. Although we as individuals were not perpetrators of these atrocities, we still benefit from these systems. Thus, we dedicate ourselves to addressing them today. This is about truthful remembrance on our part of our past, yes, but it's also about our modern day responsibility to enact policies and bylaws that will result in a more just Brookline. A unanimous select board recommends favorable action on the petitioner's motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give my apologies to Mr. Conquest because I inadvertently skipped over you for technical reasons. Anyway, Mr. Conquest, I now call on you. You have 5 minutes.
Madam Moderator, just so that, how about 5 minutes and 15 seconds?
I will give you that, absolutely.
Okay, and there won't be a need for you to say 1 minute, okay? It just kind of throws me off. I apologize, but
delighted. That's
just, okay. Thank you very much. I'm reading this first part on behalf of Ms. Raquel Halsey, who is a member of our committee and could not be here to deliver her statement. So good evening. My name is Raquel Halsey, and I am a citizen of the Mandam, Hadassah, and Akira Nation. I also serve as the executive director of the North American Center of Boston, North American Indian Center of Boston, and chair of the Indigenous Peoples Day Celebration Committee of Brookline. I speak with you this evening from the traditional homeland of the Massachusetts, whose people, traditions, language, and stewardship continue today through their lineal descendants, the Massachusetts tribe of Ponkapaw. Throughout my life, I've been told that Native American people were killed off, that my people and the people of hundreds of nations across this land were discovered were savages in need of saving, and that we are a free-loading strain on federal and municipal resources. The list of ugly comments is long. As I grew up, I realized that many of these comments were rooted in the complete lack of awareness of who Native American people are and the many contributions we've made to this state and country. We are largely invisible in our educational systems. Our treaty rights are absent from the basic legal training, and we are largely absent from data. When I moved to Brookline, I was warned that this town is one of the worst offenders in the Boston area. That caution has made me all the more thankful to have found community and friendships with neighbors, town meeting members, business owners, and my own fellow committee members. Since NACOB and Brooklyn residents came together to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, our committee has continued to identify ways for the town to work towards creating a healthier and more inclusive community for all of its residents, workers, and visitors. I am heartened to have prepared this land acknowledgement that is based on historical research of primary documents in town record with colleagues who share in my vision of a community that truly honors its past, recognizes harm, and seeks to be better together. Thank you for allowing me to speak. That was on behalf of Raquel Helmsley. This next part is my own personal statement. Thank you. For the umpteenth time, Tuesday, the 17th of October, 2017, I attended an advisory committee meeting at Town Hall ground floor conference room. I sat in the back of the room. The chair of the committee was seated at the opposite end of the room, furthest away from myself and the other seven guests. The meeting was called to order, and the first item taken up was Article 20, a resolution to support the establishment of Indigenous Peoples Day in Brookline. Two AC members who were sitting 3 feet in front of where the guests and I were seated never came to order and chatted back and forth between them, disregarding the public seated behind them. I, along with the other guests, had to strain to hear the discussion in progress around the room. One of the guests, a Native American woman, finally leaned forward and politely asked the two AC members if they could be quiet or hold the personal conversations down so she could follow the discussions that was in progress. One of the men turned to her with a contorted scowl on his face and said, "Shut up." Towards the conclusion of the meeting, the Native American women were recognized, and a second time by the chair, and she said the two AC members were harassing her and, quote, doing so the whole meeting, unquote. One of those AC members turned to the woman and, I thought, responded in a hostile and inappropriate, disrespectful voice, like he was interacting with a subhuman being. He was the culprit and not the Native American woman. In short, there needs to be an official investigation, a report, and a public apology extended to the Native American women who were harassed, insulted, and emotionally scarred by this incident. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Conquest. Our next speaker is Ms. Vanderzeel. Welcome back. Cornelia Vanderzeel. You will have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Moderator. Kaya Vanderzeel again, town meeting member of Precinct 15, member of the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, and a member of the Indigenous Peoples Day Committee. So you've just heard the voice of Raquel Halsey, Executive Director of the North American Indian Center of Boston, which is just across the line in Boston from Brookline. She's chair of our Indigenous Peoples Day Committee and a Brookline resident. You will also hear from Felina Silva Robinson, another Brookline resident and member of the Indigenous Peoples Day Committee, who is of Indigenous and African descent. Raquel's and Felina's words give us something that we did not have during town meeting's discussion of Indigenous Peoples Day in November of 2017. Much was made of town meeting's decision not to hear a third Italian-American non-Brookline resident at that meeting. There did not seem to be much concern that no Native voices were afforded the opportunity to speak. Leading up to town meeting, at hearings of the AC and its subcommittees, the Native American women who came to testify and listen were marginalized and even silenced, as detailed by Mr. Conquest. This underscores why we here in Brookline need the acknowledgement of the history of the Brookline area, both before and after the arrival of European colonists. That is what the members of the Indigenous Peoples Day Committee have put before you tonight. We propose a statement that goes beyond a generic land acknowledgement so that we can attempt to come to terms with the past of our town. There have been attempts to water this statement down and change the intent of the acknowledgement as put forward by the Indigenous Peoples Day Committee, calling on a variety of baseless claims and hypothetical situations, even calling in town council to weigh in. You may hear some of this tonight to support any other versions that will be put forward. As we stated in the explanation of the combined reports, perhaps this history is uncomfortable for some, all the more reason to confront the harsh truths of the birth of the United States.
1 minute.
Thank you. This is not because we ourselves were here at the time, but it is part of our history and we need to confront it. We urge you to vote no on any resolution, amendments, or substitute motions if they come before you, and yes only on the motion as put forward by the Indigenous Peoples Day Committee, joining the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, the Select Board, Brookline PACS, and belatedly the Advisory Committee in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Van der Zeel. We will now hear from Ms. Fisher-Fox.
Hi. As you've just heard, we'll be hearing this statement at the opening of town meeting. My name is Olivia Fisher-Fox, town meeting member, precinct 5. Article 11 looks at the history of Brookline and the brutal atrocities that undeniably occurred. We all should acknowledge the tragic history and vow not to repeat those injustices. We can stop here, or we can include language. We are at a crossroads. We have a chance to move forward, to seek appreciation for each other and appreciation for the land. If we are going to celebrate Indigenous peoples who walked on this ground before us, let us honor them for the lessons that we can learn from them, as well as the lessons we can learn from the successes and failures of those who came before us. Let us ask for a new vision together, one that acknowledges the past and calls us to move forward constructively with civility. I respectfully request that the petitioners return with language that addresses equity and evokes a vision of cooperation with each other and inspires us to live in balance with the land. Please vote no action on Article 11 as it is currently written. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have Mr. Sandman speaking. Mr. Sandman, I believe you're speaking on behalf of the Advisory Committee and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Mike Sandman, Advisory Committee Chair and Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. Let me put my camera on here. There we go. Warrant Article 11 is submitted by the Indigenous Peoples Day Celebration Committee, and it would amend the general bylaws to require an acknowledgement of the history of Indigenous people in Brookline that would be read by the chair or a designee of that committee following the singing of the national anthem at town meeting. The Advisory Committee's Human Services Subcommittee and the Advisory Committee itself had a rather circuitous path to our recommendation for favorable action. You can tell how circuitous it was by the fact that the subcommittee held 3 meetings, and by the last advisory committee vote, which was 11 in favor, 10 opposed, and 6 abstentions, to recommend favorable action. The text and length of the statement to be read are not specified in the proposed bylaw. A sample statement less than 3 minutes in length was offered by the petitioners, and it points up the drastic impact the European settlement had on Indigenous civilization. The statement references both colonial and post-revolution history, including African-American slavery in Brookline. The Advisory Committee reviewed the potential legal risks to the town from the proposed bylaw. There was a discussion about putting the requirement for the statement into a resolution rather than a bylaw, about prescribing the text of the Indigenous people statement in the bylaw or in a resolution, and about prescribing a version of the land acknowledgement that was adopted by the town of Great Barrington. We voted on various forms of bylaws and resolutions and went through multiple reconsiderations. The representatives of the Indigenous Peoples Day Celebration Committee said that the committee would stick with the article as written by the petitioners. And ultimately, the Advisory Committee made its prior votes moot when we voted 11-10 with 6 abstentions to support the original article, which, as noted earlier, is a bylaw and which does not prescribe the text of the statement that will be read at town meeting. Some Advisory Committee members felt that since this article has no impact on the town's finances and operations, that we should make no recommendation and simply say, vote your conscience. That view fell just 1 vote short of a minority. And thus, after much debate, the Advisory Committee recommends favorable action on Article 11 as originally submitted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sandman. We will now hear from Ms. Norton. Maya Norton. Ms. Norton, you have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Maya Norton, and I am speaking to you as a member of the Indigenous Peoples Celebration Committee to ask you to
Tell
vote.
us what district you're from. Are you a town meeting member from a district?
I am a community member.
Okay, I apologize. I spaced out on that. Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm going to start over. I'm a resident of Precinct 8. Hello, my name is Maya Norton, and I'm speaking to you as a member of the Indigenous Peoples Celebration Committee to ask you to vote yes on our article and no on all others. The Indigenous Land Acknowledgement we propose today was written as a collaboration between the North American Indian Center of Boston, NACOB, and our committee with the support of Dr. Barbara Brown, founder of Hidden Brookline. Raquel Halsey played a vital role as both the executive director of NACOB and our committee chair. We authored this land acknowledgement with care and thoughtfulness to serve as a reckoning of the history of our community in alignment with the committee's mission to to recognize, quote, the adversities suffered by Indigenous people as a result of the European conquest of the Americas. Now I will read you the land acknowledgement. As we gather today as town meeting members, let us take a moment to acknowledge the history of this land we call Brookline. This is the unceded land of the Massachusetts people whose traditions, language, and stewardship continue today through their lineal descendants, the Massachusetts tribe of Ponkapog. Today, we are living on land that was taken by force. In 1641, the colonists in Brookline had allocated to themselves almost all land that had been inhabited by Indigenous people. Land was not the only form of theft that occurred. Lives were also stolen. Historical records state that in 1675, during King Philip's War, 7 Indigenous men were sold into slavery in the Caribbean by residents of the area that we now call Brookline. The 7 men represent part of the early slave trade. Slavery in Brookline continued and grew, but soon those enslaved were African or of African descent. By 1746, enslavers claimed ownership of over half of all Brookline land. We acknowledge the theft of land, culture, and lives, and the ensuing enslavement of Indigenous and African peoples that occurred here. These early policies set the stage for centuries of systemic racism. As we remember these atrocities, town meeting members and the larger town must commit ourselves to address the ongoing inequities that are the result of our history of colonialism and racism. Although we, as individuals, were not perpetrators of these atrocities, we benefit from these systems. Thus, we dedicate ourselves to addressing them today. Members of town meeting, you have heard the words of some of our committee, Raquel Halsey, Arthur Wellington Conquest III, Dr. Kaya Vanderzeel, and myself. Now I pass the baton to Felina Robinson Silver, who will share with you what it was like as a person of Indigenous and African heritage to raise a family in Brookline who fought for their rights and recognition. Again, please vote yes on our article and no on all others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Robinson Silver, you are next. Please unmute. Yeah.
My name is Felina Silver Robinson. Correction on the saying of the name. I live on Brook Street and am a member of the Indigenous People Day Celebration Committee and a member of Precinct 4 and a petitioner of the warrant Article 11. I have lived in Brookline for most of my life, moving here with my family when I was 3. My mother is Cherokee Indian. Her family hailed from South Carolina. My birth father, not the man who raised me from age 3, hailed from Richmond, Virginia. His roots on the family tree show both Native American and African American heritage equally. I remember that my mother told me that she needed to cut her hair in order to find work in the Brookline area. This may seem unimportant to some, but felt like an assault on her culture and heritage, which may be part of the reason why she didn't want us to learn much of our background when we were children growing up. My second oldest of 5 daughters understood and was proud of her Native heritage. She stood up for her beliefs all through high school. She marched each Columbus Day in support of changing the name of that holiday to reflect Native American history. She was a member of the later a president of the Native American Alliance Club at BHS. In 2007, she successfully fought to have the Native American warhead removed from the parquet gym floor. She was bullied for this by her peers to the point that she received death threats. Her grades fell, but she picked herself back up and moved on to be on the dean's list at college. I'm so proud to have a child who is strong in her identity and willing to fight for what she believes in. As you can see, for my family, this is much more than an abstract piece of history taking place a few hundred years ago. It is personal and current. I ask that you vote in favor of the article as put forward by the Indigenous People Day Celebration Committee and against any amended or substituted motion that is before you tonight. This is too important to me and my family. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will take this opportunity to point out that the main motion is now the only motion, which makes it much easier when we vote. And I call on Ms. McClelland. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you.
And identify yourself.
Nicole McClelland, I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 11. Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm speaking tonight in support of warrant Article 11, which would amend an existing bylaw to include the reading of a land acknowledgement statement at the beginning of town meeting. I appreciate the support we've heard tonight for this article from the Select Board, a close voted advisory committee, and our speakers, so I'm going to keep this brief. I will just say that it's worth knowing that land acknowledgements, including the frank ones using unequivocal language, have been incorporated into the traditions and ceremonies of hundreds of communities and organizations across this country, some for many years already. Elementary schools, kindergartens include land acknowledgements in their practices. One thing that we heard from advisory committee, from Mike Sandman and from attending advisory committee, was the prospect that there would be, that acknowledging this reality of our history could create some liability for the town. So speaking to that, in case anyone has that hesitation tonight, is the only other thing I'm going to do during my time. I will say, simply acknowledging the reality of our history or the injustices that have been part of that history and our shared responsibility for righting those wrongs is not wrong, is not dangerous. I've actually heard that language used. I would ask you, are we really to believe that if we amend an existing bylaw to include a land acknowledgement, that Brookline could somehow be putting itself in a perilous position? Are we really to believe that we must always weaken our language, water down our efforts, and soften our laws into resolutions? I think sometimes it's important to remember that if something just seems right and good, it is just right and good. I would encourage you not to subjugate your good judgment to any fear mongering or to accept any arguments as gospel. Just think for yourself, to question, to vote, to decide how we set the priorities, as we heard last week. I hope that tonight, as in the future, we're able as a body to employ both our consciences and our critical minds when we vote. This is something that we owe to our past and our future. A reckoning with our history is important, as you heard from all the petitioners here, and is not wrong to acknowledge this. It is right and it is crucial. If we're to learn from our history, we must uncover it, understand it, address it, teach it, and remind ourselves of it regularly, not skimming over the difficult parts, but focusing on them. It is in those difficult, painful places that growth happens. So with gratitude for the petitioners and for this warrant article and the speakers who showed up many, many times during the process to participate in their governance, and to offer us an opportunity to acknowledge a critical part of our history, I ask you to join me, yes, in voting tonight on this article. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have Mr. Lepson who is going to speak. Lepson, L-E-P. Robert Lepson, yes.
Thank you. Just need to get myself situated here. I'll start the video. Let me bring my back
Could you
over
identify
here.
yourself, please?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, moderator. I'm Robert Lepson, town meeting member from Precinct 9 and also a member of the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, speaking on behalf of a unanimous CDICR. Arlington has one, Winchester has one, Somerville, Springfield, and Great Barrington all have land acknowledgement statements. As many of you may know, land acknowledgement is a common practice in places like Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And last week, what did Brookline do at the start of town meeting? Section 2.1.11 of our town bylaws states that we must recite the Pledge of Allegiance and sing our national anthem. So we did that, but that's all we did. There's no secret to anyone here that our town, our Commonwealth, and our country was not an empty wilderness when settlers first arrived here 500 years ago. People had been living on this land for more than 10,000 years when colonists first set foot in North America. So why is the land acknowledgement statement at the beginning of town meeting to be an issue? Why is this even remotely controversial? And please ask yourself, what is it about this warrant article that town council has felt the need to effectively sort of put a scare in all of us, saying that the petitioner's version of this warrant article, quote, creates a risk of unintended adverse legal consequences, and that certain language could potentially be used during future land acknowledgement readings that could, quote, be introduced as statements against interest in future claims against the town? In the end,
Lepson, this is outside the scope. Could you please continue with your general discussion?
I am. In the end, reality is reality. During a recent select board meeting, select board member Ashkenazi stated, and I quote, "This is fact. This is historical fact, and we are acknowledging it. And whether we acknowledge it or not, it is still historical fact. And this land acknowledgement places us in history in a really important way, and it says something about who we are as a town and what we believe." And during that same meeting, select board member Green referred to what we used to call in the law adverse possession. For those of us, myself included, who are not attorneys, I had to research the meaning of adverse possession. My understanding is that adverse possession is a way to obtain the title to property by physically occupying it for a sufficient time frame. This means that one can acquire property without owner's consent if one possesses it for a long enough period of time. In Massachusetts, the property being claimed must be possessed continuously for at least 20 years. And I would say that 400 plus years probably meets that standard. To me, and hopefully, I will be finishing in 10 seconds. To me, and hopefully to you as well, the adverse possession doctrine essentially makes town council's concerns moot. So here we are, folks, with an opportunity for Brookline to catch up with so many other cities and towns across the Commonwealth and all around the world. Let's do the right thing. Let's follow the lead of the petitioners and of a unanimous CDICR and vote favorable action on the petitioner's version of warrant Article 11. Thank you.
We actually have one speaker or one person who has a question, which I think is quite relevant. So I'm going to call on Ms. Gilman before I entertain a question to call, or a motion to call the question. Ms. Gilman?
Good evening.
Could you identify yourself,
Good
please?
evening. Am I connected?
Yes, you are.
My name is Jane Gilman, Precinct 3, and I like to say on the land of the Massachusetts. My question is for clarification. I understand that the reason we recite the sing the national anthem, recite the Pledge of Allegiance, is there is a bylaw providing for that. And that was my confusion, whether to constrict the moderator in reciting the land acknowledgement. And so I would just like some clarity on that. Is the moderator able to devise his or her own language? Thank you.
Well, thank you for asking that question. I was actually going to direct people to page 11.11-2 to direct you to the actual language of the petitioner's motion. It starts, voted that the town will adopt the following change to section 2.1.11 of the town bylaws, adding the new fourth paragraph to read as follows. Following the singing of the national anthem, an acknowledgement of the history of Indigenous people in Brookline shall be read by the chair or a designee of the Indigenous People Celebration Committee. That is the full text of the motion. Does that answer your question? Ms. Gilman?
Yes, thank you, Madam Moderator.
Okay, we have had a motion to call the question. I will now entertain it. Requires a second, a second and a 2/3 majority. I'm getting there. Let me know when you're ready to start the vote. Oh, I apologize. Yeah, not quite there yet. Yes, the people who are waiting to speak are Miriam Ashkenazi, pro, Deborah Brown, pro, Martin Yassin, question, Gil Hoy, question, Bonnie Bastian, pro. We will now hold the vote on whether to call the question, requiring a 2/3 majority. Starts now. While we wait for Ms. Vanderkay, I will confirm that this vote is a recorded vote. Ms. Vanderkay, please. Okay.
Yes,
Ms.
I vote yes.
Okay. So can you? The motion fails. I'm sorry, the votes are 137 yes, 89 no, 6 abstentions, and the motion fails. Okay, we are now going to come to the excitement of the night, which is to talk about Article 18. I'm sorry, I'm confused, obviously. Oh my God. I know, it's like, I apologize. I had one too few cups of coffee. All right, so we will continue listening to people, and that was not a vote on the motion. Ms. Ashkenazi, can you please let us know what you would like to say?
Yes, Miriam Ashkenazi, Select Board, speaking on behalf of myself. I'll keep this brief. You know, we have been doing land acknowledgements. I work at the Harvard Kennedy School. We've been doing land acknowledgements for years now. They're beautiful. They're important. We cannot even deem to think that we can deal with our racist history until we acknowledge it. And this is a beautiful way for us to honor and acknowledge and learn and move forward as a community. I'm very proud of this warrant article. I'm amazed by the work that's gone into it. And Bob Lepson already stole my words. You know, these are historical facts. How we honor them is as important as as their existence. So I really urge you to vote yes on this warrant article. Words matter, these words matter, and this is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ashkenazi. We will now hear from Deborah Brown. Welcome, Ms. Brown.
Hello. Took me taking me a little while to get organized. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Surprisingly, I'll be brief. I don't know what town council's looking at. You know, there's a lot of.
Could you please identify yourself? And
I'm so sorry.
I just want to remind you to stay within the scope of the actual article and what town council has opined may or may not be relevant. So just keep that in mind and please go forward.
Then my comments will be even briefer. My name is Deborah Brown. I am town meeting member, Precinct 1. And I think that the language says something really beautiful. I think that similar language is being used in large portions of this country. I don't think that we should fear some litigious person or tribe coming along because we have decided to own up to our past. I don't even know why I'm saying our, because I don't think I had a whole heck of a lot to do with it. But I am willing as a Brookline resident to own this. And I'm asking everybody who is a Brookline resident to acknowledge that, you know, our benefits are predicated on the backs of Indigenous people, of people of color, and to a large extent continue to be. And statements like this afford us all an opportunity to reflect on who we are as individuals and as a community. So I would encourage you to support this proclamation. I would encourage you to ignore town council. She's wrong. So I used to practice Indian law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. We now have a question from Martin Yassin.
Can you hear me, Madam?
Yes,
Moderator?
please identify yourself and let us know what your question is.
Martin Yassin, Precinct 2. What I am unclear about this resolution is, are we saying that the same statement will be read every night of the town meeting? Just we're going on for days and days. Or are we saying that this is a statement that will be read at the beginning of the first night of the town meeting? I think that it's
I may answer that.
Okay.
It will only be read at the first night of town meeting in the same way that we only pledge allegiance and sing the Star Spangled Banner the first night. I apologize for interrupting you, but
I didn't know that.
Have a further question? Yes, you must tune in late. Anyway, do you have any further questions?
No, except it's not a question. I would just make an observation that there's a question in my mind whether a statement like this, which I agree with the facticity of the statement, but I am somewhat troubled by it being read at the beginning of a town meeting, which is convened to conduct the town's business. And I just kind of wonder if such a statement isn't better placed on the town website, on the town Facebook or whatever, so that anybody who comes to see what about the town of Brookline, they see this as an opening acknowledgement by the town of its history and so on and so forth. I just question whether seems like it's almost like a creed or a catechism that precedes the business of the town. And I'm somewhat troubled by that particular context of the statement itself, which I don't have any issues with. So
if I may, this was certainly an issue that was addressed during the debates, and I'll call on Mr. Fernandez to answer that.
Oh, good. Thank you. Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member. Sure, absolutely. And so a land acknowledgement traditionally does take place at the opening, as Madam Moderator mentioned, just at the opening of proceedings of an event. The intent here is really to center the body, just as something like a Pledge of Allegiance or a singing of a national anthem is meant to center us and remind us of a certain aspect of our history. This land acknowledgement also does the same, except it's a very different aspect of our history. And so, so folks are certainly welcome to disagree that should be something that would happen, but that is the purpose and intent of it. I can say I would certainly, in addition to passing this land acknowledgement, be happy to bring to the board, including it as part of the Town of Brookline website in some way. So thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you very much. I will now call on Mr. Gil Hoy, who has a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Moderator. Gil Hoy, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13. I recognize the importance of this. I like it. I want to vote for it. But I think before voting, I would like to hear from Town Council whether and how this article may pose potential legal liabilities for the town.
Okay. Ms. Murphy, are you handling this, or is somebody else from your office?
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Mr. Hoy, for the question. I appreciate, I can see that I've made a lot of friends with this article, and I appreciate the opportunity to respond to some of the comments that have been made.
Please identify yourself. So
Jocelyn Murphy, Town
friends with.
Council. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Jocelyn Murphy, Town Council, also a proud resident of Precinct 16. The trouble that I have, I think a true land acknowledgement statement is a brilliant idea. I think it's a respectful way to honor the indigenous people who were stewards of this land before and continue to be stewards of the land that we call Brookline. The problem with this warrant article is that it is not a land acknowledgement statement. A number of the speakers referred to statements that have been adopted by other municipalities. Frankly, I'm only aware of one in Massachusetts, which is Great Barrington's. I don't believe that Arlington, I could be mistaken, I don't believe that Arlington has adopted a statement to be read as part of a bylaw at its town meeting. But every land acknowledgement statement that I've come across is a traditional, true land acknowledgement statement that refers, as I said, to the land that we now occupy. And so the difficulty with this particular warrant article is that it promotes an unrestricted statement. It allows a statement to be read at the outset of town meeting that we can't identify, because the bylaw permits a statement of any kind to be made. And as is illustrated by the statement that was produced by the Indigenous People Celebration Committee, that statement very clearly exceeds land acknowledgement and refers not only to the history of Indigenous people, but also of African slavery. So that precisely illustrates the problem. If town meeting were to refer to the example, the Great Barrington Statement, which can be found on the Goldenrod supplement, you will see that that is a much more traditional statement. And I would have no difficulty whatsoever with the town or town meeting adopting a statement of that nature. Similarly, the statement that is being proposed in Arlington is also a traditional land acknowledgement statement. I'd like to read it briefly. It says, "We acknowledge that the town of Arlington is located on the ancestral lands of the Massachusetts tribe the tribe of indigenous peoples from whom the colony, province, and commonwealth have taken their names. We pay our respects to the ancestral bloodline of the Massachusetts tribe and their descendants who still inhabit historic Massachusetts territories today. And that is also true of the institutions like Harvard University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who have indeed adopted land acknowledgement statements. But again, those are true land acknowledgement statements. So in conclusion, Mr. Hoy, what concerns me is that if adopted, this bylaw permits an unrestricted statement to be made year after year, town meeting after town meeting, that we can't presently identify, and that could be introduced as evidence in, for example, a civil rights trial as a statement against interest. In my opinion, it is not in the best interest of the town to adopt this bylaw, although I very respectfully suggest that a true land acknowledgement statement would be an extraordinary way of honoring the indigenous people of the land. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Ms. Bonnie Bastian.
Hey everybody, Bonnie Bastian, Precinct 5. When we have a land acknowledgement that was written in collaboration with the North American Indian Center of Boston and other Native American leaders, who are the ones impacted by our lack of acknowledgement of the violent past that is at the center of all we have in this country, is disrespectful and shameful. To blunt the truth for our own comfort. This is the very least that we can do. This is the lowest bar possible. This is not controversial. Acknowledging our history takes nothing from you. This is a chance to better ourselves a little bit as a community. But also, what does this have to do with land claim settlement acts? I would like to also ask Jocelyn Murphy. There's a process in place that's well established in Massachusetts and in New England if there were going to be a claim like this that came to pass.
Ms. Murphy, can you address that question, please? Jocelyn Murphy.
And if you could cite the case law.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Jocelyn Murphy, Town Council. I have never represented that this has anything to do with the Land Claim Settlement Act. I think that might have come from someone else at one of the debates. So I can't answer that question. That doesn't concern me. What concerns me is the use of an unrestricted statement being used against the town as a statement against interest in litigation.
As moderator, I'm going to actually interpose and ask if someone might find it helpful to know what a statement against interest is. If someone has a question relating to that, could they raise their hand? Otherwise, we will move on. We will allow Ms. Bastian's question to be answered about what a statement against interest is, and then we will move to call the question. So Ms. Murphy, can you explain what a statement against interest is? Yes, unmute Ms. Murphy. Mr. Stone.
Yes, a statement against interest is a statement that is made by a party.
Ms. Murphy, I apologize. We've been interrupted by a point of order. So hold on one second, Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Danny Stone, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. Earlier, my colleague, Ms. Brown, was told not to go outside the scope of the article before she spoke because Madam Moderator said that Town Council's opinions may not be relevant. So I don't know why we are wading into this discussion. It seems to be contrary to what was said very shortly ago.
You are absolutely right. I agree with your point of order. And if Ms. Brown wants to come back and finish her comments relating to that, as long as there are no aspersion cast on anyone, I have no problem with that. But first, we will let Ms. Murphy answer the question about what is a statement of against interest.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Jocelyn Murphy, Town Council. A statement against interest is a statement that is made by a party and then is introduced as evidence in a civil matter against that party. There is a federal rule of evidence, I believe it's Rule 803, that permits the introduction into evidence of statements that have been made by a party that are used against them in that civil matter.
Thank you. Going back to Ms. Deborah Brown, I would like to know if you would like to continue relating to your comments about town councils and their opinion.
Well,
and I apologize for cutting you off.
No worries, no worries. My name is Deborah Brown, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. And, you know, these things could be treated as admissions against interest. That's pretty much standard common law. And it's consistent with the, you know, the federal rules of evidence. But you know, there's a lot of tribal law. There's an awful lot of tribal law on this. You know, there's the Federal Land Claim Settlement Acts, which were designed specifically for New England to capture, you know, how best to address tribes' claims regarding lands. And so, first of all, you have to be a federally recognized tribe to come in with that claim, right? And so then after you're a federally recognized tribe, you're going to have to negotiate with the federal government to get any land. And to my knowledge, there's only one tribe in Massachusetts that has been able to do that. So it's actually two tribes now. So it's not an easy hurdle, but it's covered by an awful lot of federal law. And there's a lot of regulation involved in it that's managed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We will all be dust in our graves before somebody brings a legitimate claim to take anything from the town of Brookline. It's the federal law is just not, it's not designed for that to happen. So I can appreciate that when you look at a straight-faced interpretation of the common law, if you look at it even in terms of perhaps some contracts law, the federal government stepped in years ago, back in the early 80s, and laid out a body of law concerning this. So I don't think we should lose sleep over this. I just don't think we should lose sleep. So thank you for allowing me to address this again. And you know, that's my memory of it.
Okay, now I am unmuted. And in line, we have David Day, who has a question about the article. Mr. Karen, who has a question about the article. Mr. Levy, who would like to say something. Mr. Ananian, who has a comment. Nicole McClellan, who has a question. Ms. Vanderzeel, who would like to respond to town council. Ms. Ashkenazi, who would like to respond to town council. Mr. Gayshak, who has a comment in favor of the article. Mr. Hoy, I think I will allow Ms. Elisa Jonas to speak ahead of you since you have already spoken. And Mr. Yassin, I believe you spoke on this article, but honestly, it could have been the last one. So that is who is waiting. And we are going to now, when my trusty folks are ready, take a vote on the motion to call the question. A 2/3 vote is required. Thank you. The vote is over. I will now call on Ms. Vanderkay to let us know what her vote is. Ms. Vanderkay, when you unmute yourself, tell us who you are, what precinct you represent, and what your vote is. *6.
Judith Vanderkay, precinct 9, yes.
Thank you. We have Maslin Jarrett on the phone as well. *6, please identify yourself and tell us your vote. Maslin Jarrett. I think we lost. I think it's Mr. Jarrett. I apologize if I have that wrong. All right, then can you please tell me what the totals are? Okay, the count is 133 yes, 82 no, 9 abstentions. The motion fails. We will continue discussion with Mr. David Day, who has a question relating to the article.
Hi, thank you, Madam Moderator. David Day, Precinct 16. My question is simply, I know that we have this article, the original Article 11 before us. I'm a little confused as to whether there's any additional amendments or other versions out there that we are going to be asked to vote on later, or is it just the original article, just as you had read it out loud?
This is it. There's only one. It is just the article as I read it, the proposed bylaw, which is found on page 11.2 of the supplemental or the combined reports. We now have Mr. Karen, who has a question. Mr. Hoy, what can I do for you?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Gil Hoy, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 13. When you listed the speakers in terms of comments, you said who was pro and who was against, and I just wanted to note that I am against this warrant article, which you didn't mention.
I apologize. Thank you for
okay.
pointing.
Thank you.
Now we will move on to Mr. Karen, who has a question.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. John Karen, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 12. I just wanted to clarify what the bylaw change would actually do, because we've heard a very carefully crafted statement, and I'm not clear as to whether voting in favor of this would direct that the Indigenous Peoples Celebration Committee read that statement and only that carefully crafted statement, or if what the warrant article actually does is authorize the Indigenous Peoples Celebration Committee in its discretion to make whatever statement they believe is appropriate and subject to whatever revisions, modifications, or changes in its sole discretion they decide would be warranted. I hope that my question's clear. I'm trying to decide if we're authorizing reading of the specific statement or just authorizing them to decide what statement they believe would be appropriate at future town meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. Could you address this question, please?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Yes, I can. Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member. This is the statement that has been crafted through the publicly available meetings of the Indigenous Peoples Celebration Committee. If there were in the future to be changes to this statement, they would be similarly made in public view with public comment and the ability for members of the public to weigh in during those meetings in the lead up to a future town meeting. I think the expectation here is that there may be some flexibility moving forward some years out, meaning that if notions of language, let's say, a different term emerges at some future time, that's an improved version of terms like indigenous or other terms that we use here, that we would be able to amend the language to update and match sort of modern day conceptions around those terms. But the intention here is not to update this every time town meeting happens. The committee has other work to do, and I don't think that's going to be a good use of their time. So you could expect that updates might come in the future, but those would all be through the usual public process.
Mr. Fernandez, can you clarify that the language you are referring to is a language on page 11-3, language for land acknowledgement?
I can. That's the language I was referring to there, and I think the petitioners wanted to make sure that that was included, although it's not in the bylaw itself, wanted to be included so that town meeting members could consider that language as we have tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Levy.
Hi, Mark Levy, Precinct 7. Being totally unburdened by legal education, I'm a little bit confused about what's happening on the legal front. I think on the ethical front, I have no confusion whatsoever that this is the kind of statement that makes sense. And even if it brings in people other than Indigenous people, I don't think that's a problem. I think that's a benefit for the statement that's being proposed, because I firmly believe that people living today don't have to take guilt for what their ancestors did or somebody else's ancestors did. I think we're all living today have to take responsibility for the future. And this is one way of acknowledging that the past is prelude to the future. And any future decisions need to have this kind of history in mind. I also think that totally, because I sometimes play a lawyer in town meeting, that if anybody had standing to sue the town because of some statement made in this statement that's being proposed, or this bylaw, there's nothing stopping them from going back to history and finding exactly the same facts and introducing those facts into evidence. Basically, the big dangers will cut out a step for any future plaintiff, but the result will be essentially the same. And being, again, totally ignorant of law, please disregard the last part of my statement. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levy. Mr. Ananian has a comment.
Sure. Whoops, sorry. Here I am. Scott Ananian, a town meeting member, Precinct 10. We heard a brief statement about Arlington's land acknowledgement statement. I just wanted to correct or elaborate the record a little bit on that. It is true that their town meeting has not yet passed their land acknowledgement that is scheduled, that is their warrant article 85, believe it or not, which is still upcoming in their town meeting. However, their select board did adopt their resolution land acknowledgement, not only for town meeting, but for all public meetings in Arlington on January 25th of 2020. Thank you. And of course, I recommend favorable action on this warrant article. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have Ms. McClelland with a question.
It's a comment and then a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. Nicole McClelland, town meeting member, Precinct 11. I'm a bit troubled by what just seems to be a pattern where we as town meeting members are routinely forewarned against voting our conscience. I'm sort of stunned to hear raised on the floor of town meeting the specter of some indigenous land reclamation that happens, as if we employ acknowledgement of known historical facts after we say the pledge, that indigenous people will sue the town to take our land. It feels like we're being asked to subjugate our own good judgment to what is little more than fear mongering, honestly. So my question is whether town council can cite any cases anywhere in the country where indigenous people have actually brought a lawsuit against a municipality simply because they have adopted a land acknowledgement. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Jocelyn Murphy, Town Council, and thank you, Town Meeting Member McClellan, for your question. I need to be particularly clear. I don't in any way suggest that it is Indigenous people that would use this statement in a civil rights case against the town of Brookline. The trouble with this article, to offer a little more clarity to Town Meeting Member Karen's question, is that this bylaw, if it's adopted, permits any statement to be made in the future, not the statement that is found in the explanation of the article. So we don't know. I think Town Meeting Member Deborah Brown referred to when we are all dust. We don't know what the Indigenous People Celebrations Committee will want to forward as a statement, and we won't have any ability to restrict that if this bylaw is adopted. I want to be particularly clear. I absolutely respectfully support the reading of a true land acknowledgement statement, but that is not what this bylaw permits.
Now have Ms. van der Zeel.
Hi, Kay van der Zeel, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 15, and a member of the Indigenous Peoples Day Committee once again. This conversation is, best you can put on it is interesting, but it is beside the point. If you read the warrant article, it actually doesn't say that this is a land acknowledgement. It's acknowledgement of the history of the Indigenous people in Brookline. Therefore, I think some of these issues about it, you want us to have a generic land acknowledgement, is totally inappropriate, because that's not what we want to do. There is a precedent for this. Elizabeth Solomon has done this at the Kennedy School as well. Her statement, by the way, is more in the order of about 6 minutes long. You know, the changing of the statement, as people have said, that's not anticipated. And my hope actually is that there will come a time when we no longer need to recite this sort of history, because we all know it, and we have all worked to mitigate the effects of the previous inhabitants of this town and their policies. I don't buy into these legal things. We know that lawyers can, people can sue for just about anything they want to. And sometimes it goes someplace and sometimes it doesn't. So thank you, but please, let's finish this up and just vote on this. It's not really that difficult, I think. So I hope we don't need this in the future, but I think it looks like during my lifetime, we're going to need something like this. Thank you.
Okay, the question has been called again. Do we have a second? Here are the people who are waiting to speak. Ms. Ashkenazi, Mr. Gayshak, Mr. Hoy, Ms. Jonas, Mr. Yassin, Mr. Saltzman, I believe that's Ms. Friedman, Mr. Martin, Ms. Granoff, Ms. Vogt, and Mr. Black. So, knowing who is waiting in line, we will now take a vote as to whether or not to call the questions. A 2/3 majority is required. Let's begin the vote. Thank you. Okay, time has been called. Ms. Jarrett, what is your vote? You can unmute by hitting *6. Ms. Jarrett, are you with us? Okay, let's go to Judith Vanderkay. Please unmute. Yeah, *6.
Judith Vanderkay, yes.
Okay, have we made contact with Ms. Jarrett yet? No, all right. Then I regret we're going to move on. Could you give me the? Oh.
Mazal Jarrett, precinct 12. Voting
What's your
no.
vote? No.
No.
Okay. Okay, we have a vote of 174 voting yes to call the question, 39 no, and 13 abstentions. The motion passes. All right, we will now address the main motion, which is found on page 11.2 of your materials. The motion is to decide whether or not to adopt a change to the town bylaws and add a paragraph relating to Indigenous people. A majority vote is required. Shall we go? All right. Okay, Ms. Jarrett. What say you?
Vote Mazal Jarrett, precinct 12. Voting yes.
Thank you. Ms. Vanderkay. Ms. Vanderkay, are you with us?
Judith Vanderkay, yes.
Okay. Okay, the motion passes by a vote of 201 yes, 20 no, 20 no, and 14 abstentions. Thank you. Mr. Flint, what is your point of order?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I was just wondering about this substitute motion under Article 11 proposed by Harry Friedman.
That was withdrawn.
Oh, it was withdrawn. I apologize.
Yes, no problem. All right. We are now going to deal with the substance of Article 18. And actually, I'm going to propose something new and suggest we take a 5-minute break so people can stretch their legs. We will resume at 9:20. Do I officially have to say we recess for 5 minutes? Do we need a motion? Okay, 5-minute recess. See you at 9:20. Thank you. Okay, we are back. And I am going to start this actually with a question for town council, which has to do with the emergency authorization that we have to hold our meetings remotely. My understanding is that that expires on June 15th. And I want to confirm whether that understanding is correct.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I believe that is correct. I understand that there is legislation afoot that would extend some of the legislation that is in place to permit government to continue to work smoothly. So I cannot answer that question immediately.
Tommy Vitolo has some insight into this. Mr. Vitolo.
Hi, Tommy Vitolo, State Representative, 15th Norfolk and Town Meeting Member at Large. I do have some insight to this because I filed H 2210 back in January, imagining this exact circumstance where the state of emergency expires and a community is still in the middle of their town meeting. Fully expecting Brookline to finish by June 15th, my office determined that there were two other communities that might split the June 15th deadline. One of them, their town clerk and state rep has assured me that they only need 2, at most 3 nights to complete their town meeting. So they are not at risk. And the other is meeting outdoors in person. They are not at risk. Up until earlier today, I had thought that the legislation wouldn't be needed because no community was at risk of passing June 15th, but I had not anticipated Brookline taking 2.5 hours to discuss the 2 warrant articles we did tonight. At this pace, I do worry about our own community. So I cannot tell you if the bill will pass the House and the Senate and be signed by the governor within the next 17 or 18 days. That strikes me as awfully difficult, which puts Brookline in a difficult situation. If it does not pass and we continue to meet virtually past the state of emergency, then our town meeting will not be considered legal. And all of the decisions we have made in this town meeting will not be considered legal unless and until the state legislature passes a special act specific to Brookline stating that the things that we did in our town meeting are legal. And that is not a place I recommend Brookline choose to put itself in. So I will opine here that we ought to continue working diligently and finish before June 15th so as not to cause ourselves any undue hardship.
Okay, I certainly agree. That would be a very grim result. I am going to explore, we have to finish by the 15th. That's just all there is. No, my daughter, I do not want to talk to her. So we are currently meeting on, is it June? Okay, 2nd and, okay, 2nd, 1st and 3rd, and the following week on the 7th and 9th. So I propose that we look into meeting on the 8th and 10th and 14th. God forbid we'll need that, but the way we're going, I don't see any way to avoid it. Is Ms. Goff available?
Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator. I think we would need to check the availability of the high school. So I can't commit to available dates until we do that.
Okay, could you please check the dates I just mentioned? Those being the 8th, 10th, and 14th. And I know that will cause a conflict with a school committee meeting, but that we just can't take the chance of going past June 15th. So we will soldier through, and Ms. Goff will get back to me and Mr. Gadsby tomorrow, and I will get back to all of you and clear your schedules. Thank you. Now, I hope that is sufficient inspiration to move things along, go quickly, and sorry, my daughter keeps calling me. Anyway, and be efficient. So with that said, we are going to start Article 18. What did I have to reconvene us? What? A special town meeting? Oh, okay, I thought we would, okay. Ms. Brown, who brought the articles for the special town meeting, we're going to address that as a procedural matter right now. It was called and then postponed till tonight, and she graciously agreed to move it if necessary, depending on how long it took us to get through Article 18. Again, nobody expecting it would take us this long to get where we are now. So what I will do is, I've lost my language, call. We will convene the special town meeting. I will accept a motion to do that. I believe that's required, and then we, I'm sorry. Okay. So we will convene the special town meeting, and then I will take a motion to recess it until after we have considered Article 18 or June 1st, whichever comes first. Okay, so special town meeting is hereby convened. Now, I would like to take a vote, or actually get a motion on convening the special town meeting until the earlier of the discussion and vote on Article 18 or June 1st. It's been moved and seconded. Let's vote on that. The vote is whether or not to reconvene the special town meeting on the earlier of the finish of discussion of Article 18. Yeah, just adjourn. Yeah. To adjourn, yeah, to adjourn the STM. So the vote, to be clear, is to adjourn special town meeting, STM, until the earlier of June 1st, or when we finish Article 18 discussion and vote. A majority, I believe, is required. Let's start the vote. Thank you. Ms. Vanderkay, how do you vote?
Judith Vanderkay, Precinct 9, yes.
217 yes, 6 no, 8 abstentions.
The motion passes with 217 votes yes, 6 no, and 8 abstentions. Thank you. We will now come to the reconsideration of Article 18. And here is the way it's going to work. As we all know, the article concerns whether or not to extend the reach of the Lawrence Local Historic District. Partly because one of the bases we have had to reconsider the motion is confusion about exactly the effect that passing the article will have. We are having a presentation by Polly Selko, Assistant Director of Planning. She will remain available after the presentation to ask questions, and you can ask questions after she's finished it immediately. We will also have Dan Bennett, Building Director, present, and John Buchheit for Town Council. All right, after that, we will hear from people who have signed up to speak. And we will take questions and comments from people in the regular manner, contacting the chat monitor. Please indicate if you have a question or comment and if you're for or against. And yeah, okay. So let's confirm. The motion itself is on page 18-7, again, to approve a local historic district. And I am now going with pleasure to turn over the podium, microphone, et cetera, to Ms. Polly Selko.
Good evening, Madam Moderator. I'm Polly Selko, Assistant Director of Regulatory Planning. Several questions have arisen about warrant Article 18, which proposes to extend the Lawrence Local Historic District designation to include 5 additional properties. LHD and zoning regulations are 2 very different things. Zoning regulates how many units, how large a building can be, et cetera, on a piece of property. And LHD gives the Preservation Commission the authority to regulate the exterior appearance of any buildings on the property. So the 2 are very, very different. The LHDs, of course, are the goal of that is to preserve the historic or architectural buildings that are significant to Brookline. And 2 of the properties that have been included in the extension for the Lawrence Local Historic District, which were owned by Wheelock College previously, are 116 Colchester and 295 Kent Street. They're both zoned SC7. Now, SC7 means that there's a minimum lot size of 7,000 square feet, that single family are allowed on the property. But interestingly enough, you can convert the single family to a 2-family if the dwelling was built before 1962, which in this case they were. Because the 2 lots exceed 7,000 square feet, they could be subdivided into 6 lots of approximately 7,000 square feet each if the lots are combined. Interestingly enough, if the 2 lots are combined, the lot size equals exactly 1 acre, which is the minimum lot size for allowing a cluster development. So that cluster development would override the SC7 zoning and would allow several scenarios for developing the property. For instance, in each of the 2 existing buildings, you could have more than 2 units, up to 8 units if you could meet certain bonus criteria. The special permits would probably be required to allow exceptions to those for setbacks and also to meet the affordable housing requirements. Now, if these properties are given an LHD designation, the number of units allowed would not necessarily be any different, which is, as I've stated, could be up to 8 units if the bonus criteria are met. Now, some have suggested that they'd like to see larger apartment buildings on these properties. The only way that could happen would be for an upzoning of those properties to allow multifamily. Typically, when new zoning is proposed, the planning department would undertake a study and they would look to see whether the new zoning would allow buildings that were in context with the neighborhood and determine what is the appropriate density, massing, and height that the new zoning would allow. So it really has to fit in with the surrounding buildings. Now, although with an upzoning, it might be possible to preserve the existing buildings by putting additions on them, it probably would be impractical. Therefore, an LHD designation would probably limit the ability to construct a large apartment building or buildings on these properties. However, if a 40B project was proposed, that would override the LHD designation and allow the demolition of the existing buildings. Now, even if the town has met its 10% of affordable units, the ZBA is still allowed to consider a 40B project. And with a 40B project, the existing zoning regulations can be overridden. So it could allow a much larger building. 20 to 25% of units in a 40B have to be affordable units. And that's in comparison to if it was just a regular 40A multifamily building, they'd need to provide 15% affordable units. So with both 40B projects and 40A projects for multifamily apartments, the units that are not affordable would not be required to be affordable and could be luxury rate, market rate units. The chart that's on the screen now shows you the maximum number of units that would be allowed either under designation or under zoning without an LHD designation, or if there were an LHD designation. And you can see that it's the same number of units. So an LHD designation does not change the number of units. So I know zoning is confusing, and if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Whether people have questions. What? I'm muted, okay. I don't think it's possible, but is there anyone who have questions now for Ms. Selko, or should we just go through the list, Mr. Well, actually we have people who are already ready to speak, so we would go through them first. Sorry, it's getting late, and we will address the eyes. Okay, we have a question from Ms. Selko. From Chris Dempsey.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Chris Dempsey, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. I have two questions for Mrs. Selko. One is, I have heard her say 8 units, and it wasn't clear to me if, it was clear to me that that was only if the two parcels were combined. It was not clear to me if that was 8 units total or 8 units per existing parcel, meaning 16 units total. So that's the first question. The second question is, under the scenario in which that would occur, how many of those units would be required to be affordable?
Okay, it is 8 units total if the properties were combined. So for instance, you could have 4 units in one building and 4 units in the other, or 2 units in one building and 6 units in the other. The affordable housing requirements are triggered if you have 4 or more units. So yes, the affordable housing requirements would be triggered, and they would be 15% of the units. And of course, there could also be a cash payment so that the units themselves are not actually provided, but the payment is paid into the Housing Trust Fund.
Did you have a second question, Mr. Dempsey?
Just a clarification that the affordable housing would only be required if 4 units or more were created. In an instance in which, say, the smaller parcel remained a single family and the larger parcel was turned into a 1 or 2 family, there would not be a requirement for affordable housing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question for Ms. Selko from Natalia Linos.
Hi, Natalia Linos from Precinct 6 also. And I'm sorry if this is a very simple question for others to understand, but you explained that 40B overrides this LHD, but is there another type of upzoning that exists that wouldn't override? So I'm trying to understand, like, once we've made the LHD designation, is there, had we upzoned and not had it, would there be a situation where it's a different type of upzoning that doesn't, for example, take into account affordability, but just having more buildings on that lot? Is there something that having the LHD which prevent us from having more units? Does my question make sense? Sorry if it's not making sense.
Well, it's a little hard to understand, but I think what you're saying is LHDs do not limit the number of units on a property, but they do allow the Preservation Commission to have control over what is built and what it looks like.
Yeah, and you said that they decide based on whether it fits in. So if these 7 units are part of a broader LHD categorization, I would imagine they could make the case of it fitting in, like the big tall buildings not fitting in, even though they're neighboring to Longwood Towers, more because they're seen as a unit with the rest of the local historic district.
I'm not sure I understood that.
It's probably because I don't quite understand the zoning laws myself. But what I'm saying is that if we're talking about upzoning, then the planning department would do a study, you said, and would determine based on what is the correct fit, right?
Well,
So
they would recommend the correct fit. It's
Yeah.
town meeting that passes the zoning.
So if
Can
they
I interrupt for
recommend the
1 second?
fit, sorry, I
And-
apologize.
And see if somebody might find it helpful to have upzoning defined for them.
Okay, well, upzoning just means increasing the allowed density on a piece of property. And then, and increasing the size of the building, the height, the massing. As opposed to downzoning, which would be limiting what could be built on a property.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, Ms. Linos. Oh, you need to be unmuted again. I apologize.
Thank you. And I really apologize to everyone if it's obvious to everyone else. So upzoning can happen. Are there different forms of upzoning? Like,
Absolutely. For instance, in our multifamily districts, we have different categories. And the different categories allow larger buildings or smaller buildings. So they set the parameters for how much density and how big the buildings can be.
so would an LHD designation trump any, you mentioned one type of upzoning that sort of overrides the LHD, but are there other types of upzoning that don't override the LHD designation, I guess is my question.
No.
All upzoning overrides. So if we were to decide to upzone after we've called it it wouldn't matter.
I'm not sure if you upzone and something's an LHD, that's fine. But what happens is if in order to build the big apartment building that's tall, you might have to demolish one of the buildings. There are other ways you could do an addition and keep that building. But if you had to demolish it, it is true that the Preservation Commission could say, we want to preserve that building because it's, contributes to the beauty of Brookline, and we want to preserve it. So unless you can build that apartment building and still keep that other building, you might not be able to do it.
Okay, so it makes it practically impossible to do it, even possibly practically impossible or more difficult. Okay, I think I got it. And I apologize to everyone else for my multiple questions.
It's all right.
Okay, we have a question from Ms. Selko from Rebecca Mattner.
Good evening, Rebecca Mattner, town meeting member from Precinct 11. I just had a A couple of a follow-up to Ms. Linos's question, and then I'll ask my original question. So was it fair to say the creation of the local historic district, the expansion of the local historic district would make it more difficult to upzone this parcel in the future?
It wouldn't make it more difficult to upzone it, but then for someone to come in and want to develop the property, it would make it more difficult if they felt that they had to demolish one of the buildings.
Thank you. That is extremely clarifying. And would the creation of the local historic district impose a ban on demolition, or does it just mean a developer would have to have like a 12, an 18, up to 18, a delay in the demolition up to a certain number of months?
No, with a local historic district, it's not a delay in demolition. They have the total jurisdiction to say that you cannot tear the building down if that's, and I would say in most local historic districts, they don't usually allow demolition. They might allow some changes to the building, but I don't think they'd allow a total demolition.
Thank you. It's extremely helpful. So my last question was, your slide showed that the same number of units would be possible under current zone, would be possible regardless of whether the district were expanded. But what my understanding was, is that because the exterior, in a local historic district, the exterior must remain unchanged, or any additions must go through an extensive design review process, that it is probably likely that the 8 units, if there's a historic district, would be likely to be contained in the existing buildings or with an addition, therefore limited in size. Whereas if it were not a district, there would be more flexibility to do larger additions, and it would be easier to create larger units, like family-sized units, as opposed to smaller 1 and 2 bedroom condominium units. Is that, do you think that's an accurate statement?
Well, let me just clarify that. You can build additional buildings and still keep the existing buildings.
Yes, right.
But keep in mind that the thing that's determining how many units is really the zoning, because these properties are zoned single family. They were intended to have either single family or 2 families. They were not intended to have apartment buildings. So if you wanted to have apartment buildings, you would have to, you know, have a zoning amendment that would change the zoning designation.
Right, but if, thank you. If both rubrics allow us to create 8 units of housing, is it more likely that we could create 8 family-sized units of housing if there is not a district? Or to say it the other way, does creation of a local historic district make it more likely those 8 units would be smaller 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom units as opposed to family-sized units?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Warren has a question for Ms. Selko.
Hi, thank you. Paul Warren, town meeting member of Precinct 1. Good evening, Paulie. It's nice to see you, and thank you for helping with clarity on this. I'm going to try to make my question simple. First, I may have 2 questions. Under the current zoning, without an LHD, so if Article 18 does not pass this evening, and these buildings were to be torn down, how many units could be built without triggering the inclusionary zoning trigger, where you'd have to build affordable units or make a payment into the Affordability Housing Trust Fund?
If the buildings were torn down and the lots were divided, because the size of the lots together are about 42,000 square feet plus, you would be able to have 6 single-family units.
So 6 single-family units, and those could be 6 single-family units without having to do inclusionary zoning. None of them would have to be affordable.
Well, no, 6 in our zoning bylaw, even if you do a subdivision, you would have to provide affordable housing if it's 6 or more units.
Okay, so if it's less than 6, so if the developer decided to build 5 luxury, ultra luxury homes, after tearing down those 2 historic homes, there's nothing that we could do about it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Zurab has a question for Ms. Selko.
Hi, thank you. Michael Zurab, town meeting member, precinct 3. So I wanted to ask about like setbacks, basically, because I'm curious about whether the Preservation Commission could basically say, like, suppose a developer wanted to expand the building forward towards the towards the street. Would the Preservation Commission be able to say, no, that's not allowed because the setbacks from the street are part of what makes this neighborhood historic? Is that something the Preservation Commission would be able to regulate?
Yes.
Okay, crisp and clear. Let's move on to Mr. Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you, Ms. Selko. The question I have is concerning the Wheelock properties currently or prior to their sale.
Mr. Richmond, is this going to relate to the, these are the Wheelock properties that are at issue here?
Yes.
I apologize.
Yes, so one of them is a dormitory and the other is the president's home with what we would characterize now maybe as an auxiliary dwelling unit, an apartment over a garage. So I was wondering if we knew what the occupancy was, because when I looked at the assessor's database, it looked like there were 8 or so dormitory rooms in the existing dormitory and 2 units on the president's house. So in effect, we have 10 units or possibly more. I mean, they could have subdivided any number of dormitory units provided they could squeeze them in there. So it seems to me that the density, the current use is non-conforming, and once it's sort of, I guess, it's no longer owned by a nonprofit or something, might have Dover access or this or that. If they go back to being single-family homes, so in effect, the density. I just wanted to confirm my impression that the density would actually be going down going forward.
That's correct, because a nonprofit educational institution, has a more liberal way of developing properties.
Thank you.
Lisa Jonas.
I don't have a question for Polly Selko right now. I had a comment in support of warrant article 18, so I don't think I'm supposed to be speaking now.
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that. And we will move on to Wendy Friedman.
Hi, thank you. Wendy Friedman, Precinct 5. I just wanted to get clarity on something that you said. You mentioned the zoning board being able to preserve a home if they considered it to have historical significance, I think. Was that even if there's not a historic district? Like on an individual basis, can the zoning board decide that a home cannot be torn down, or was that only if it was in a historic district?
Well, only if it's in a local historic district, but then it wouldn't be the zoning board that would be deciding that, it would be the Preservation Commission.
Okay, did you say something, but maybe I got confused. Did you say something about the zoning board making a?
I said that if the zoning board had a 40B project in front of it, they could allow the demolition. A 40B would override an LHD designation.
Okay, and then I also just quickly wanted to follow up on Michael Zorob's question about setbacks. Can you just clarify right now with the zoning so if there's no historic district and the houses are torn down, besides the number of units, what regulations have to be followed in terms of setbacks there? Like, can they build on the entire lot? Like what regulations need to be followed in terms of zoning?
Well, there is a dimensional requirements table in our zoning bylaw. So let's say the lots were divided into 6 lots and 6 single families were built. then the zoning bylaw would say what the front yard, side yard, and rear yard setbacks could be. In a single-family district, a building can't be over 35 feet in height, for instance. And then there's also the size of the building is also controlled.
Marissa Vogt.
Hi, my name is Marissa Vogt. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 4. I have two questions. The first is, could the Preservation Commission object to the placement of solar panels or a heat pump required to make a property fossil fuel free?
Did you say placement of solar panels?
Yeah.
Typically, solar panels would be allowed. So, I mean, I think they could suggest perhaps, how they look or which side of the house they're on, but otherwise solar panels would be allowed. And your second question was about fossil fuel free?
Well, that was the other part of the first question, like the examples of things like a solar panel or a heat pump required to make the property fossil fuel free.
Well, they can only regulate anything that you can see from the public street. But that doesn't mean that they would necessarily forbid it or prevent it. They work with the owner and they come up with something that's reasonable.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question was that earlier today we were forwarded an email from the planning board chair, Stephen Hyken.
Steve Hyken.
I'm not sure. Steve Hyken. Mentioning that 287 Kent Street sits on over an acre of land if you include an adjacent open parcel. And he said that the open parcel is subject to a conservation restriction that was granted as a public benefit by the developer in 1983. And I was wondering, what is the public benefit of that private open parcel?
Well, if there's a conservation restriction, it depends what the details of the conservation restriction are. I would guess that for this particular parcel, it just means that there are certain restrictions about removing trees, for instance. With some conservation restrictions, they actually will allow the public to come in and enjoy the open space, but they don't have to allow that. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to call on Wendy Friedman again because I must have cut her off and I apologize for that. Ms. Friedman. Wendy Friedman, did I cut you off?
No, I was done. But
Okay,
thanks for
thank you very
asking.
much. And we will go to Barbara Scotto.
Barbara Scotto, Precinct 8. I want to clarify something I heard. I thought you said originally that the Preservation Commission would be unlikely to demolish a property if it were on a local historic district. I live on Crown and Shield Road, and in that case, we had a house that was in the historic district that had to wait an extra year, but that was demolished to build 8 townhouses on a lot that had held one house and a garage. Then I heard you say, I think to Miss Friedman, that they would be allowed to demolish. And I want to clarify that in fact, yes, if a 40B is building, they can request the Preservation Commission to demolish, and it will most likely be granted.
Okay, I didn't exactly say that, Barbara. I said that if it's a 40B, they don't have to ask the Preservation Commission for permission to demolish. They are allowed to demolish a building.
Okay. I just wanted that to be clear. Thank you.
Okay. We now have Kate Silba with a question for Polly.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand two things. One is about the timeline, because there is currently a demolition request by the current owner for these buildings. And there is I think everyone now sees that the current zoning isn't going to produce anything different with or without. But I think there's some hope that in the future we will upzone, at a future town meeting, we will upzone this. And that could, I take that to be Ms. Mattner's inquiry. Could we later upzone this and get more housing? So I have two questions. One is, if that's what we want, do we have any ability after upzoning it to make the developer who currently owns it build more units? Do we have anything that would make them do that? Or since he's already asked to knock it down, do we have some reason to think he's already got a plan for how to use it? That's the first question. And then the second question is about timelines. If we came back and upzoned it at a November town meeting, is there any reason to think that the current developer would respond to that upzoning, or instead already has a plan? I mean, I'm concerned about hearing you say we could just currently tear down those two buildings and build 5 that were similarly, not useful as housing, but single family homes that are kind of luxury homes. And that may be the plan. I just, I hadn't thought about that.
Okay, let me just say that many developers put in a demolition request, even though they may not have decided that they really want to demolish a building. They do that in order to keep their options open, okay?
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that this developer has actually said that they would agree to have an LHD designation. So if there's an LHD designation, they will not demolish those buildings. If they combine the 2 lots, they don't have to be single family. You could have up to 8 units on that property if you combine the 2 properties.
Okay, and I guess I guess what I'm asking is, what if we as a town want them to build more units? Is there, I'm in favor of warrant Article 18 because I don't think we're going to get more housing on that site than is going to happen with the designation. But I'm trying to understand whether or not I'm wrong. Is there something the town can do to force more housing there than the current owner wants after we've upzoned? Or does the current owner control this?
Well, most developers, if you upzone something, want to take advantage of that and to build more units. But you can't force them to do that. They could still build fewer units if that's what they want to do. Sometimes people build fewer units that are bigger units, and they feel they can make just as much money doing that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But and I guess the timeline, there's just no way to, it's just no way to know about the timeline, right?
Well, the demolition delay has a defined timeline. When a year is up or 18 months is up, whatever they put on it, then they could demolish the buildings. But keep in mind that upzoning, first of all, it has to be approved by town meeting. And second of all, it's got to be appropriate. If you have a single family district, you can't just right in the middle of the single family district all of a sudden have this multifamily district. You want to have something that's a continuum, a transition. So, you're not going to necessarily want to upzone it to create that many units at that particular site. Maybe there's another place in town that you think could be upzoned more appropriately.
Well, but then the point is to get any more units than 8 on this site. A bunch of things need to happen. Both we need to reject this historic district tonight, and we need to upzone.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Ananian, you have a question.
Sorry, I'm muted, I think.
You're all
Could
set.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would just like to follow up on Marissa's question. I think Ms. Selko stated that solar panels could be added if they were not visible from the street, but I'm looking at a map of these properties, and my understanding is 116 Kent Street has visibility on the southern side to the street. 289 has visibility to Longwood Avenue. 282 has visibility to Longwood Avenue. In fact, there's very few of these buildings where you cannot see the south side of the building from the street. And the south side is, of course, where you need to put solar panels unless we were to move Brookline to the southern hemisphere.
Excuse me, I think you misunderstood me. I did not.
Well, that was my question. So is the—
Yeah, no, I didn't
requirement?
say that they shouldn't be visible from the street. I said that the Preservation Commission could suggest, you know, where they might be or what side of the building they're going to be on. They would work with the owner to figure that out, but I don't think they would prohibit solar.
Are there any examples of solar panels being approved in a historic district recently?
I'm afraid we'd have to ask the preservation planners that. I see Allison may have the answer to that as well.
Or I'm sorry, who were you suggesting?
Well, Allison
Allison
Steinfeld is.
And Mr. Elpern may know as well, but why don't we call on Allison Steinfeld first? And I don't know if Mr. Elpern is still online.
Yes, actually, right. Mr. Elpern would be able to tell you that.
Okay, so Mr. Elpern, we are calling on you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we approve solar, we've approved every single solar panel application that we've been presented with in local historic districts facing streets, for example, on Walnut Street. We've done that since the very beginning of this recent surge in putting up solar panels on Pond Avenue, in Pill Hill. We've never denied one. The most we've ever really done, and we can't usually say put it on the other side of the house because it would be in shade. So the most we've ever really done is say, could you think about making an array of them, which is a little prettier or more regular? If you move that vent, could you complete the array of panels as a rectangle rather than having something irregular and misshapen on the roof? So that it looks, but we, in our own design guidelines, we've rewritten our design guidelines to include a section on sustainability, which addresses solar panels amongst many other things and endorses them, encourages them, and treats them basically as removable things. In the future, there may be some time when people don't want either the same solar panels or solar panels at all because they're getting their electricity from another source, they could remove them. So we don't look at that as principally affecting an historic structure.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Could I just follow up to ask about heat pumps? Similar question for fossil fuel free.
Same sort of thing. I mean, condensers, which is what we really mean by heat pumps, are the only part that's visible. And we look at and approve condensers every month, usually twice a month, because people are constantly applying for adding more condensers, whether it's for a heat pump or for AC. We completely support that. What we usually do, if there are spaces where they are less visible, like the back of the house, that's great. Usually, often they end up at the side of the house, and we ask people to construct some sort of screen to conceal them from public view. Sometimes just shrubbery, you know, but we admit them all the time. They don't actually, again, they don't really affect the historic structure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Nobrega. Ms. Nobrega, are you with us?
I am Mariah Nobrega, Town Meeting Member Precinct 4. My question is whether if town meeting were to vote favorable action on the LHD, it would make 40B more likely in that scenario. And then I have a follow-up question.
Well, if with the current zoning, I don't think that a 40B would be more likely. It's hard to say. I guess that obviously with a 40B, you could have a more dense development.
And then my follow-up question to that is, would we perhaps be better served by a collaborative upzoning of the type that was described by Kate Silbaugh, that might, rather than having this 40B perhaps be an only possibility? Coming back with collaborative upzoning, perhaps in early fall.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear all of it, but you said if you come back with collaborative upzoning in the fall, what would that mean? What were you asking?
I'm saying, is it possible that rather than having the, additional density, you need to wait a minute, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. That rather than having the 40B or the low density or the high density, that we could have sort of a collaborative zoning approach, sort of what was described by Kate Silbaugh, where we could have an upzoning with better possibilities on the parcel and a more an improved approach for all parties.
Well, let me just clarify something about 40Bs. Once the town reaches 10%, and we're now at like 9.9%, the town has the ability not to approve a 40B, or more likely to condition it so that it would be smaller or have fewer impacts on the neighbors. So I wouldn't say, once we've reached the 10%, I don't know that a 40B will be so attractive to anyone, because it doesn't have to be approved.
Okay, Susie Roberts has a question. I just want to give people an idea of where we stand. People very understandably have questions, and I want to encourage those. And it is my intention not to adjourn this session until all the people who have questions for Polly have asked their questions, unless it reaches an unreasonable time. And I apologize for that, Polly, but I'm trying to be efficient. And if that's the case, we will then start our calling people to discuss Article 18. And I hope that if necessary, you and Mr. Bennett and Mr. Buchheit will also be around Tuesday.
Certainly, yes.
So, and there are 7 people waiting to ask questions, and I do not want to discourage anyone from asking a question. These are complex issues. I just wanted to let everybody know what the scoop was. Ms. Roberts.
Yes, hello, Susie Roberts, Precinct 2. I had a question about whether if the LHD is approved, there are some circumstances under which demolition could occur. In other words, if the building is found not to be structurally sound. And I was curious about whether or not that has already been investigated for these 2 buildings.
I don't believe it has been, and there hasn't really been any mention that they're not structurally sound.
Thank you.
Lauren Bernard.
Yes, hi, Lauren Bernard, Precinct 8. I wanted to clarify and follow up on something that my colleague Kate Silbaugh said. She said at the end of her question, so in order to get more units on this site, say, calling it one site with the two buildings, you said, I mean, she said, we would have to both not have an LHD and upzone. And and you said yes. And what I'm hearing is that that's not the case, in fact. And Mr. Alpern can weigh in here too, because it seems to me that what the LHD is concerned with exclusively is the visual of the shell of the building. And if you were able to do an extension on the back, for example, I mean, one of these buildings was a dormitory. I was actually in it. They were fairly big rooms. You could perhaps envision a situation with an LHD where you perhaps could get 8 more units. I mean, not 8 more than 8 units. Or is this limited by the zoning? So I guess I just want a clarification on what you responded to Kate Silbaugh's question, because it seemed to me that I don't know, it just seemed to me that these were sort of competing narratives. That's my first question.
Ms. Silko, have you lost you? Have you abandoned us?
I know I haven't abandoned you, but I had been muted. Now I'm unmuted.
Okay. Welcome back.
Now, if I can remember the question, yes, you could possibly build an addition on the back of one of these buildings. There would be nothing stopping you that. But however, the current zoning, the 2 parcels combined, and if the bonus criteria are met, the limit would be 8 units. If it were upzoned, you could build more units, even if it were an LHD. But it would be probably more difficult if you wanted to just tear down the building and build a huge apartment building, then that would be problematic if there's an LHD.
No, I guess the first part of your answer answers the question that the LHD is not preventing. If you were to upzone and have an LHD, you could perhaps expand, to the extent possible on that parcel.
You could, and we have several examples in town where there have been buildings that have been preserved, and there have been very large additions built to the rear of them, and they've been very successful.
Would you mind giving an example?
I don't know the exact addresses on Winchester Street. Certainly, I don't offhand know the exact addresses.
But this has happened before.
It happened several times, yes.
Okay, and okay, that's good. That's good information. Thank you.
Naomi Schweitzer.
Good evening, Madam Moderator, Naomi Schweitzer, Precinct 10. My question is, when was the last time the Preservation Commission approved a 4+ family addition?
Mr. Alpern, Polly, can you answer that, or would you?
Well, I mean, if the zoning allowed it, you mean? I'm not sure I understand the question. If the zoning allowed 4 additional units, when was the last time the Preservation Commission approved that?
Yeah, within a local historic district.
Well, maybe Mr. Alpern can answer that, but remember, you have to first, the zoning has to allow it, regardless of the LHD.
In my experience, it's never been requested. Most of the additions we do are additions to single-family homes. We done new construction in local historic districts, which are entirely new, 2 families, for example. Not a lot, but it's not a function of what we approve or don't approve, but as Polly would say, of zoning and of where the local historic districts are and what they're zoned to do. I mean, we don't have a position on how many units, but we would welcome the opportunity to work with any developer that's making units in buildings to the maximum that they can, and work with them to make sure that the buildings, to the extent that we can, are preserved, and that the additions that are done or new buildings that are constructed are sympathetic to the existing buildings. Knowing the history of this, the application for this extension itself is made by people living in condominiums and buildings which were once single family and are now both 5 units and 6 units. So it's almost a given from the beginning of this process that that will happen in some way or another in these buildings if we're permitted to extend the district. We welcome it.
Thank you. There's no question to call. I can reject that. We haven't even had people talk. Sorry, it's painful, but we are continuing, soldiering on. Get yourself something to drink and settle in. Vina Priestley.
Hi, Vina Priestley, Precinct 4. I have a couple of questions. So you stated that if there were 8 units, that it would be like 15% would comply with the 40B. And can a developer, like maybe this is the second part, can a developer reject like doing a 40B if they pay a fine, or is it mandatory because we haven't hit that 10% in Brookline yet?
Well, the 15% is not for 40B. It's any development in Brookline that's more than 4 units now is required to provide either 15% affordable units on site or a cash payment to the Housing Trust Fund. That's completely separate from a 40B.
Okay, so my main question, right, is affordable housing. So if a developer changes these units into, like, let's say 6 or 8, like you said at most, is it mandated that a certain percent have to be affordable units, or can they just make condos and make them all luxury?
No, if they make them into 8 units, then they are required to meet our affordable housing requirement of 15%, either cash payment or units on site.
So it's mandated because we haven't hit that 10% yet.
Unfortunately, I know it's very confusing, but the 40B is different from the 40A. In other words, any apartment building, forgetting about 40B, has to meet the affordable housing requirement. But if it's a 40B, then the thing about a 40B is that they don't have to conform to the size of the zoning. In other words, they can ask for more leniency about how tall the building is or how big the building is.
Okay. Thank you.
Susan Park.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Susan Park, Town Meeting Member from Precinct 2. And I'd like to kind of piggyback off of Kate Silball and Lauren Bernard's questions about upzoning and having LHDs in the same area. And I know you said a couple times that it's because of the zoning that you can't. So my question is, how does one change zoning so that you can have a LHD district, but also have more affordable housing or have more apartments? So, I mean, because I know you mentioned it's because of the zoning. So is there a way to change zoning or what is the process? Thank you.
Yes, there is a way to change zoning, and that is by, recommending a zoning change to town meeting. When you recommend that zoning change, if it's done by citizen petition, as you know, all the different boards and committees and the planning department will make recommendations on whether the zoning is appropriate or not, the upzoning.
Okay, and then thank you. And then my second quick question is it feasible and appropriate to change zoning to have an LHD district coincide with what everyone is talking about, having of upzoning and having more housing?
Well, LHD is completely separate from the zoning. Okay, the zoning tells you how much you can build on the site. The LHD relates to trying to preserve the characteristics of existing buildings on the site, which doesn't mean they can't be changed at all, but they're looking at what you can see. So they're mutually exclusive, really.
Okay, well, I'm just saying that, you can have an LHD district and you can also have upzoning if there was a zoning change. And I guess you answered that already. So that
Yes,
was really my question. All right, thank you.
Kathleen Cavell.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, I do have a question for Ms. Selko, but if I can give my speech in favor of a yes vote, will we get to those, or should I figure that these questions are all we're going to do tonight?
These questions, unfortunately, are all we're going to do tonight. We will break after the questions because it is 10:30, and then we will resume Tuesday and start in with the discussion and statements on 18. So if you could hold off on.
Well, I do have a question.
Yes, no, I was going to say, and ask your question.
Thank you.
That would be great.
Thank you. Ms. Selko, isn't our zoning, isn't what you're referring to when you talk about units over 4 required to set aside at least 15% for affordable housing? Isn't that because we have inclusionary zoning and it would apply?
Yes.
Well, you didn't call it that. I think that one reason people are confused is because they think the only set aside provisions are under 40B developments, but we have set aside provisions because we have inclusionary zoning, and 15% or more has to be devoted to affordable housing in a development such as you're talking about, an 8-unit development on these 2 sites combined, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
I didn't use the word inclusionary. I'm not sure everybody would know what that meant, but I did say that 15% need to be affordable in a regular project.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because I think people had thought the only way to get affordable housing
Okay,
was
Ms.
via
Cavell,
40B.
I apologize, but we've had a point of order. Ms. McClellan.
Hi, Ms. Nicole McClellan, town meeting member, precinct 11. Can you clarify, Madam Moderator, we have to vote to adjourn, right? So would it, in theory, given our June 15th deadline that we're trying to meet and the fact that we've already debated this at length now on 2 nights or discussed it at length, could town meeting vote not to adjourn and then somehow vote to vote and just get the vote done tonight, even if we don't get through all presentations? Because this is very clarifying.
I'll tell you why we can't do that. The reason, although I'm sure we would all love to do that, the reason we are having the motion to reconsider is because there was such confusion among everyone as to what exactly imposing an LHD or creating an LHD in this area would do. So as I think is being shown by the questions we've had tonight, and there are remaining questioners, there are still a lot of questions to ask. There's still a lot of things that people are struggling to understand. So I will not, as a result, accept any motion to call the question, because that would be entirely defeating the purpose of the whole reconsideration.
But if we vote not to adjourn, we will just keep going. And then we can vote to call the question after the first speaker, in theory.
In theory, I may not allow it, but in theory, yes, we will vote to adjourn until I will entertain vote to adjourn. Okay, here's the story. You can finish the questions now. Well, I'm not through with my first. Or we can continue with Ms. Selko Tuesday, which may happen anyway. I would recommend, given our timeline, given that we have a June 15th deadline, that we continue with the questions people have for tonight, and then continue. That's my plan. Another point of order. Fishman? What is your point of order? Mr. Fishman, you're unmuted.
A
Mr. Fishman?
motion to, can you hear me?
Hi, what's your point of order?
A motion,
You turn off your video, our people are suggesting, and that way we will have your, great, okay. And now you're muted. Okay, now we can hear you. What's your question or point of order?
we move to adjourn tonight, that a motion to refer would be proper on tomorrow.
No, I will not entertain a motion to refer. Mr. Toffel is the next person in line.
Hello, everyone.
Oh,
Mike
sorry,
Toffel.
Ms. Cavell. Sorry, Mike. Kathleen, yes, I interrupted you for the point of order. I apologize. We will go back to you to finish up any questions you may have.
I'm done.
I'm done. Okay, then back to Mr. Toffel.
Hello, Mike Toffel, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8. Ms. Selko, thank you so much. You've been so helpful tonight. I'm personally a little puzzled by all the excitement around the possibility of upzoning this particular parcel that's being considered for a local historic district extension. And I wonder if you can help us understand the context. If you think about the areas near like our transit dense areas along Beacon Street, along Commonwealth, along Harvard, and so on, whatever you and the planning department consider to be transit rich areas. What proportion of that area, of those areas, is covered, just roughly speaking, by local historic districts? Because it strikes me, based on my total ignorance of this area, that it's a very small percent. Is that true?
Well, for instance, you take the Crown and Shield district, it's not far from rapid transit. Pill Hill is not far from rapid transit. So I think you were asking whether LHDs are usually close to rapid transit or far from rapid transit?
No, I'm sorry. Let me clarify my question. I'm trying to understand, of the housing units that are close to rapid transit, what proportion of them are covered by local historic districts?
All right, I understand. Well, the proportion is small because we don't really have many local historic districts. You know, if you look at the percentage of the local historic districts town-wide, it's just, you know, it's a small percentage.
So all the interest in upzoning that we've been hearing tonight could be equally applied to this other areas that are not covered by local historic districts.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Was that whole thing unmuted? Yes. All right, so we have two more people. After that, I will take a motion to adjourn until Tuesday. Or I will entertain such a motion. And I just wanted to point out that the more points of order we have, you are entirely entitled to make, but the longer it will keep us here. So with that in mind, I am calling on Mr. Richmond, who has a question for Ms. Selko.
Thank you. Clint Richmond, Precinct 6. Excuse me. I just wanted to clarify something that Ms. Selko said, that if the Wheelock properties were by right maximized at 8, that doesn't mean that there would be any affordable units, because I think you said that there could be 2 units, 2 properties, each with 4 units, and they would not qualify for inclusionary zoning. So you could go from 1 to 8 and have no net increase in affordable units.
No, because actually with cluster zoning, they have to stay as one property. So even though the 4 units are in 2 different buildings, it's still eight units on one property.
Oh, thank you. That's an important clarification. And then the other question I had is, it's my understanding that most of our LHDs are in predominantly single-family home areas. Is that correct?
Yes.
Has any LHD ever been upzoned?
I don't believe so.
Thank you.
Mr. Gladstone, what do you have for us right now?
Thank you. Scott Gladstone, Precinct 16. Good evening, Polly. My question is about inclusionary zoning. I understand that once you are at 4 units, that kicks in a requirement to have a certain percentage of affordable units built, or to instead pay cash into the affordable trust fund. Isn't there a number, and what is that number, at which you no longer can purchase your way out of building the affordable units, but you actually have to build the affordable units? And the second part, in your experience, do developers often try to stay under that cap in order to just make the cash payment instead of building the actual affordable units?
Well, it used, the zoning has changed recently, but it used to be that you had to, if you were over 16 units, then you had to have the units on site. But there were exceptions to that as well. It was really up to the Housing Advisory Board what they wanted to accept. And yes, developers all the time try to get out of even the cash payments, and that's why the number of units has been lowered and lowered and lowered to try to capture, even smaller developments.
Do you remember what that number is now that requires the building of the actual units as opposed to paying into the trust fund? I do not. It's a genuine question.
I don't. I'm sorry.
Like,
I mean, it was always 16, but I'm not 100% sure that it still is.
I think that number was lowered in the last iteration when we changed that bylaw.
Although I have to say that the Housing Advisory Board has said that it's actually quite valuable to get cash payments, that they can sometimes do more with the money, provide more units with the money.
Right, but not on that site, right? Not on the site being developed.
Well,
with that
no, it hasn't been discussed.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ridgwayho, I apologize for mangling your name, I'm sure, but you have a question for Polly.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. This is Carlos Ridgwayho, Precinct 14. Regarding the question that you just answered about how many LHDs have been upzoned, to put it in context, how many districts have been upzoned in general without the use of the overlay system for specific projects? How often does upzoning of large districts take place in town? Thank you.
Well, it doesn't happen often, although I would argue that even an overlay district is in a sense upzoning because it does allow, greater density if certain requirements are met. But I can't, as a matter of fact, in the 1970s, there was a lot of upzoning. We have a lot of large apartment buildings on Beacon Street. And after that, there was downzoning because people felt those buildings were too large.
Has your question been answered? All right, not hearing anything. I am going to see if there is a motion to adjourn and just lay out that when we re-adjourn, if we do adjourn, on Tuesday, we will be taking up the presentations relating to Article 18 that people have signed up to do. That will be our first order of business, but again, staff will be available to ask questions. Ms. Selko, I cannot thank you enough for your being here and being so helpful. Does anybody want to submit a motion to adjourn? Move it and second it. All right. Let's vote now. Ms. Vanderkay, you are still with us. What do you say?
I vote yes. Judith Vanderkay, Precinct 9.
Okay.
130 yes, 77 no, 6 abstentions.
Okay, the vote is 130 to adjourn, 77 noes, and 6 abstentions. The motion passes. We will see you at 7 o'clock Tuesday. Drink your coffee. Have a great night and great weekend.